Welcome to an IlmQuest presentation. 21 teaching techniques of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, presented by Muhammad Asharif. Part 1.
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, amma ba'd. Inshallah, today we're going to be speaking about the greatest teacher that humanity's ever known, and that is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Indeed, when we look through the Quran, when we look through the Sunnah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in many instances how to teach this Islam that we've learned. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if someone looks deeply into the techniques that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used, as we're going to see today, that they will have more effect in the truth that they have in bringing that truth to other people. And I remember once in Canada there's a lot of feminist people, men and women, that they're very much involved in this ideology. So I was once arguing with them and we were debating, and then subhanAllah, it just came to a point where I started reciting Quran to them, but I would tell them in English the meaning of the verses. Something such as the verse, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ, that doesn't the one who created know what he created? And I didn't tell them that it was Quran, but I just said the verse to them, and I said the English translation, and I watched, and these are non-Muslims, all of them bowed their head and they said, almost as if they're saying Sadaqallah, that it's true. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created us like this. And you'll see other techniques, and these techniques, if someone's involved in psychology and so on, they're very well known and they work very well. I'll give you the example of a good cop, bad cop theory. When two police officers or two FBI agents come to your house and want to interview or something like that, one of the techniques that is used is that one of the officers will be very harsh to you, and the other one will be very nice. You think that this is the way they are. Before they even speak to you, they'll say, I'll be the bad one this time and you be the good one. He says, okay. Because one of them will be shouting, will be screaming, and you'll get so much afraid of that person, and the other one will come to you and say, I know how you feel, don't mind him, he's had a bad day and so on. So what happened? And then the person opens up. A good cop, bad cop theory that they use all the time. And if you just knew that technique, just for example, if you're in an Islamic school, it's usually all bad cop teachers. You go get mad at the boy too, and a third teacher says, you get mad, don't let me be so the whole school is getting mad at this one student. But if two teachers were smart enough, one of them should be so mean to the boy, and the other one should be so nice. And they're like, I don't like the principal, he's so mean. And the other teacher says, I know how you feel, principal's having a bad day, so tell me what happened. And the boy will open up to the good teacher. But those teachers, if they were smart, working together, they would have that effect. How does this benefit you? Firstly, when you understand the techniques, you're better able to grasp what is said. So the Prophet ﷺ, you'll now see in a hadith things that you've already seen, but now you'll understand that this is a technique that the Prophet ﷺ used, that you also can use. So it'll help you in your learning of these things. Secondly, when you find out the techniques of the Prophet ﷺ, it'll increase your love for Rasulullah ﷺ. When you see how beautiful, and if you notice, for example, when the person who urinated in the masjid, and everybody got angry at him, and in the end of the story, the way the Prophet ﷺ taught him, he raised his hands, he said, Allahumma ghfirli wa li Muhammad. That, oh Allah, forgive me and forgive Muhammad, and don't forgive anyone else after this. This is how much he loved the Prophet ﷺ because of the beautiful way that he taught him. And inshallah, similarly, you too, when you learn the techniques of Rasulullah ﷺ, your love for him will increase. And what's interesting is that so many people, including Muslims, they constantly go to buy lottery tickets. And I've seen, I've been in the store and I see Muslims, even after Jum'ah, they're going to buy the lottery tickets because they hope to win the jackpot and never feel sad after that. And subhanallah, if you realize this is your get rich quick plan. And how do I mean? Because if someone becomes Muslim on your hands, لَأَنْ يَهْدِيَ اللَّهُ بِكَ رَجُلًا وَاحِدًا خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنْ حُمَرِ النِّعَمِ. Meaning that, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that if one person gets guided on your hands, it's better for you than a red she-camel, meaning that it's better for you than the dunya and everything in it. So I'll just make it a little easy for you. Let's say the jackpot is $300 million. This is your way to win that $300 million. And the odds aren't like the 1 in 25 million. The odds are very good, inshallah, if someone's sincere, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help them. Alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity to be able to guide one sister. She was in South Africa, and she emailed us and she wanted information about Islam, and I said, you're in South Africa, there's so many Muslims. And then I phoned one of the brothers in Canada. I said, I remember a South African person who grew up with us. Contact him, tell me if he has any relatives in South Africa. So he went, he said yes, his auntie, his uncle, they live in this city. So I sent that information to the sister, and then I told her, contact these people. These people lived on the same road as her. And the Madrasa Islamiyya that they were taking care of was on her same road. And so after that, I didn't hear about what happened to her. And about a month later, I emailed her again. I said, what happened? She said, they took me to the masjid, and they gave me books about Islam. They taught me and they took care of me. And alhamdulillah, last week I became Muslim. Alhamdulillah. When you see that, in my heart, I felt like I just won the lottery. And this is how the people should go forward, saying that the reward is in doing this. And like I said, this is your get-rich-quick plan. For people who are involved in da'wah, I know with the MSAs, the students especially, that they have Islam Awareness Weeks, and they're discussing Islam with the other students. How this helps a person is that when someone comes and approaches them and begins talking to Islam, those are critical words that the person is going to see. And so when they recognize the techniques of the Prophet ﷺ, they'll be better able to convey the message of Islam to others. And also, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't send us as God police, like police of Allah to expel people from Islam. That's not our duty. Our duty is to bring people into Islam and not to push them away. And some people almost, they take it as if it's their mission to make sure that nobody comes to the masjid except people that are exactly like themselves. And subhanAllah, this is the way of the layperson thinking. And some issues that some lay people are so tough on, I'll have the opportunity to ask some ulama, and you would see a direct opposite conclusion and fiqh, fatwa, from what the lay people will say. So this is how a person brings a person into Islam. And you might see even in other classes that we learn what is shirk, what is kufr, and so on. But then we don't learn how to take this to the people. So the person goes out, yeah, I just learned that what my dad is doing is shirk. He goes, Dad, did you know that you were a mushrik? And his father says, what are you saying? What are these people teaching you? Don't ever go to those people. But the person didn't learn properly. Is that how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? This is knowledge that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. And he also taught us how to teach it. And that's also his commandment sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we have to apply that just like we apply those fiqh issues that we learn. And one thing that I've noticed growing up in Canada, North America, is that a lot of parents, when their child asks them, why do we pray, why do we go to the masjid, their answer to that is to beat the child. They take the stick and beat the child, or they have no answer. And believe me, the child thinks that if the parent has no answer, then there is no answer to this. There is no meaning behind salah. And they grow older, and it's in their mind stuck and ingrained that there's no meaning to the salah. And when the parent's not forcing them anymore, they don't come to the masjid. This is in their mind. They may not say it, but it's like this. When a parent and someone who's dealing with spouses, with their spouse or with their children or Muslim youth, they'll be able to explain what they're talking about to that person that they're giving da'wah to. At your work, and when you're, for example, someone may be teaching in a Saturday school, Sunday school, or even a full-time Islamic school, what this does for a teacher, because I know some of the teachers may have knowledge of sciences or math and literature, different things, but not necessarily knowledge of Islam. Some of these techniques, they were taught in the school of education. But there are techniques that the Prophet ﷺ, you'll find it in the ahadith, and I'll show you that some of the teaching techniques that they use, modern techniques today, were techniques that the Prophet ﷺ taught us from before. And when a teacher knows those things, it reflects good on themselves. The parents then see that their child is understanding, that the child is changing. And then that reflects back on the Saturday school, the Sunday school, the full-time school, that they're able to touch the children. And then it brings more benefit to the entire system that's trying to educate these children. When a person learns how to pass on the message of Islam, they'll be more healthy. And what I mean by healthy is that when someone is unsuccessful in telling people things, it affects their health. They get high blood pressure, they get angry, they can't control themselves because they haven't learned how to pass on the information to other people. And I've seen people when they give da'wah, even though they're very knowledgeable, in some issues they only know like one dalil. So they'll say the one dalil, and the person will say back in reply, well, how do you know that's a dalil? And it's a true opinion what the person's saying, but they have no other proofs. You know what proof number 2 is? Anger. They'll say, no, you have to believe what I'm saying. And then it turns into a fight. They have a frown, they put a one proof and then anger after that. And third dalil is more anger. Fourth dalil is a punch. Fifth dalil is a karate kick, and then is like a SWAT team to beat the person up so that they can be guided. And subhanAllah, even when I was younger and I grew up in Canada, anger is not proof. Just because someone gets angry doesn't mean that they have the truth. And so many people get angry. So when someone actually knows the proof, it brings them calmness, and they won't get frustrated because they'll realize that this person needs help and I can help them. I just have to be a little bit more smoother in the way that I'm explaining it. So what we're going to be talking about today, inshallah, is how did the Prophet ﷺ teach, and that's the spotlight that we're going to be talking about. And specifically, we're going to be teaching 21 techniques of the Prophet ﷺ. How we're going to explain this? Firstly, we're going to explain the technique. After that, I'm going to give you examples of ahadith. Many of them you already know, and some you might not know, of where the Prophet ﷺ used these techniques. So you might know the technique, but you might not know proofs where it happened. What I want you to do after that, for those who have notes, is try to think of an example that you can use in your own life. A place where you can go and apply this, whether it's to yourself, or to someone around you, or maybe you've been having a recent argument with someone. How can you go and use this with them? So I want you to do that. That's interacting with what we're learning, inshallah. The book that all of this is based on, and inshallah I recommend that you get it, is called Ar-Rasul Al-Muallim, The Prophet, the Teacher, by Abu Fattah Abu Ghudda. There are other books in Arabic, but a lot of these techniques, you'll find it in the old books, but more easier to grasp are books that some modern authors have written. And they've gone back to the old books and they've just compiled these things in a way that's more easily accessible. This is in Arabic, and inshallah there's most likely books in English with this, but I'm not sure of any books in English that teach this. And all of these things are taken from the books of Sunnah and the shuruh, the sharh of those books of Sunnah, and you'll see different comments of the ulama regarding it. And also with our experience with Al-Maghrib Institute and how I've been teaching different people, in some of the points I'll give you some of the techniques and how they worked for me, and my reflections on how I've seen that in a real life situation, how something worked and how something else didn't. Bismillah. Technique number 1, رعايته صلى الله عليه وسلم في التعليم الاعتدال والبعد عن الإملال. And I'll put it in Arabic for those, this will be basically the format. The technique will be written in Arabic. The translation that's there is not necessarily a literal translation. It's not literal, so don't think that English, it's basically the idea of what's in the Arabic. And inshallah, for those who know Arabic, they can benefit from that Arabic. Which means to not bore the listener. To not bore the listener. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam would speak, as Aisha radiallahu anha said, that when he would speak, a person who is listening to the Prophet ﷺ could count his words on their fingers. They could count that the Prophet ﷺ said this, 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 and this. And sometimes, even when I studied in Medina University, I wouldn't say, I'm going to memorize this hadith. But instead, I would hear the hadith once, twice, and then if someone asked me what's the dalil for something, I could say the hadith because I automatically memorized it. Because of the shortness, the directness, and the clarity of the words that the Prophet ﷺ used. And this was the way the Prophet ﷺ spoke. When the Prophet ﷺ would speak, he would not give a marathon lecture. And I don't know if you've ever been in a 4-hour lecture. Have you ever been in a 4-hour lecture? Like a direct 4-hour lecture. The brother has been to a 4-hour lecture. What that does is that from the beginning, even the brother that was at the 4-hour lecture, if I asked you what was the guy speaking about, I'm sure you wouldn't know. After that time, all you remember is the pain of the 4-hour lecture. That's all you remember, is that was so painful. And even when I was younger and I would be with my father and we'd go to a lecture in the masjid, it was always marathon lectures. And so all I would do is tell my father, look, I'm going to go to sleep and you wake me up when it's time to go, inshallah. And I could get a very long sleep. You can get a good 2-3 hours like that. There's a reason why that people do marathon lectures. The reason is that if you ever give people a break, they will leave. You tell them, okay everybody, 10-minute break, go have some water, have some tea. They will not come back. They'll say, let me go to Stop and Go. They'll stop at the shop and then they'll go home from there. Or they'll come in too late. So the person says, let me just extend it another half an hour, and another half an hour, and another half an hour, because I'm afraid people will leave. But what that teacher doesn't understand is that the people aren't listening to that person anymore. And they will not understand what is being said. All they're doing is just respecting the person. And what my determination, if whether I've killed people in my lecture or not, is when I say, okay, everybody, you're welcome to go. I look at how quickly people leave. And that tells you how much pain they went through in the extension of the lecture, by how quickly they leave. And that means that they had to go someplace and they're only trying to be respectful for the person. In Sahih Bukhari, Imam Bukhari has a chapter to this effect, Al-i'tidal fi at-ta'lim. In the chapter, inshallah, you can look it up, that Imam Bukhari wrote the chapter of being moderate when teaching. And he gave the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in how the Prophet ﷺ would not always consistently give the people a lecture. But the Prophet ﷺ would give a lecture occasionally, and then there would be a time where he wouldn't speak. And then another. So every time the Prophet ﷺ spoke, it was a special occasion. It was a special occasion. And from my ears, in the story of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, in the olden days, the people were very much stronger as students. They were very strong students. And so they can go the entire day with learning. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu used to teach one on Thursday every week. And the people, they wished that Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu would teach every single day. But he said that I could do this. I could teach you every single day, but this is not how the Prophet ﷺ taught us, and I'm afraid that I'll bore you and you will not learn. And so in my experience, I would do a halaqa every single week. Actually, it was every 2 weeks. And some people would tell me, do it every single week. And some people would say, do it every single day. You always have people that want to do it and more often. And I would tell them that, have you come every 2 weeks to the class? And they'll say no. And then I would say in reply, then what tells me that you're going to come every week if I increase the numbers? In fact, you would miss more than what you're missing now. That's number one. Number two is that when I was doing these classes, sometimes there's a special event. So they'll say, okay, the weekly halaqa. Doesn't that sound boring? Tonight's a weekly halaqa. The weekly halaqa. Because if you miss one weekly halaqa, there's another bus coming. So the person, if they're given the option of two things, they'll always choose the one that's coming later. If there's a bus at 2 o'clock and one at 2:15, the person can get an extra 15 minutes. They'll say, I'll go at the 2:15 bus. If there's a class in university, one is at 5:30 in the morning and one is at 2:30 in the afternoon. Which class will be full? The 2:30 in the afternoon. And the 5:30 in the morning, they'll have to cancel it, because people will always take that later one. So that happens when a person is consistently doing something. People will always go for something that's later. If they know another one's coming later, they'll just go to that one. So when I was teaching these classes, there was a time where I've been to Bayt al-Maqdis, to Masjid al-Aqsa. I had pictures from Masjid al-Aqsa. So in this weekly halaqa, then I said that on Saturday, the weekly halaqa will be a journey to Masjid al-Aqsa, a PowerPoint presentation. And the halaqa that normally has 5-10 people, all of a sudden the masjid was full. Maybe 400 people were there. 400 people. Because it's a special event. It's not just a boring, consistent thing, but it's a special event. Now, I'm not saying that the consistent things aren't important. They are important, but they have to be coupled with special events. They have to be coupled with special events. And with Al-Maghrib Institute, the institute that I'm doing, is that when we do a program, it's a special event. In fact, most of the time we only do one class in one city. That's it. No repeat classes. So someone misses the class, they've missed the train. There is no other train. Because people always come up to me and say, when's the next class? And I'll tell them, give your excuse a black eye. Don't make excuses. This is the class. Tell the person who's coming to your house on Saturday to come back next week, because you're busy. And actually, subhanAllah, we're doing a class here in Houston in October, Usul al-Fiqh. And some people missed this class in the Washington area. We gave it about 3 times. We're doing it in Australia. In Houston, people will be flying in from North Carolina to come to this class. Because when they miss the train, that's how far they have to travel. But they understand the benefit from it. So these people are going to be flying in, and inshallah you're going to have the opportunity to drive down the road to attend this class, inshallah. And we'll be talking about it later. How to tell if someone's bored? I can tell you people who are bored right now. They're sleeping. But it could be possible that the person didn't sleep last night well, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bored, but if I was more exciting, then they will say, even if I'm tired, I'll still be awake and listening to the lecture. That's number one. Number two is, if someone's reading a newspaper while you're speaking, obviously, they're not understanding and they're not paying attention. How to tell if someone's bored? In some instances, a person may have, and I've seen this in masajid, that a person actually took out a newspaper during the khutbah. And they were right beside the imam. They took out, the Winnipeg Sun or something like that. They started reading the newspaper in the middle of the khutbah. When something like that happens, it's true we can blame that person, saying that, they're not paying attention and they're being disrespectful to the lecturer and so on. But that's not true. It might be that the lecturer has to change their techniques in order so that that person will pay attention, inshallah, in the lecture. One other thing, how to tell if someone's bored and not paying attention, is that when their eyesight leaves the focus of you. It doesn't always mean that they're bored. They may be thinking about what you're saying. But if someone's speaking to you, and then, suppose I start speaking to you, and then you start looking at the brother that's walking around. I know that I've lost your attention. Right? I know people are, and right when I said that, people started looking at him and they're not listening to what I say. Because when their eye is focused on one thing, that means they're not listening to that person. So if you see everybody looking around and looking for the clock and so on, that means that they're not paying attention. The person either has to stop talking or has to do something in order to capture their attention again after that. Secondly, which means رعاية المعلم مقدار عقل الطالب وفهمه. Speaking at the intellectual level of the listener. As one of our teachers taught us, a person once, he was speaking about weak hadith, hadith da'if. So he was giving a lecture in one of the villages, and he said, after quoting a hadith, he said, وَهَذَا حَدِيثٌ ضَعِيفٌ, and this is a weak hadith. So the people got so angry at him. They said, who are you to say something is hadith? The hadith of the Prophet is not da'if, you're da'if. You're weak. Because in their mind, this person is belittling the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And so the teacher is saying that when a person is speaking to someone, they should understand how much that person already learns and already knows. Because if you speak at a level that the person doesn't understand, it will be a fitna for that person. You could shake their iman. You might even push that person away from Islam because you're pushing them into an argument, into a discussion that they can't comprehend yet. And so as Bukhari, you'll see this chapter, as he wrote, teaching knowledge to some and not others for fear of them misunderstanding. teaching knowledge to some and not others for fear of them misunderstanding. The hadith regarding this chapter is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he told Mu'adh radiallahu anhu that whoever says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sincerely from his heart will enter paradise. And so the companion radiallahu anhu, he said to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, shouldn't I tell everyone? And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said no, because that they will begin to lean, they will become lazy in their deen after that. And then after the companion radiallahu anhu, he did explain the hadith, and many of you know that hadith. He did pass it on afterwards. However, what was the problem in telling everyone? The problem was, as the ulama mentioned, is that someone would think that if they only said La ilaha illallah, only by their words, they would enter Jannah no matter what actions they would do. So whether they committed shirk or whatever they would do, they would still enter Jannah as long as they said La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is not true. If they understood La ilaha illallah, because if someone is sincere to La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, they will be the best Muslim. They will be the best Muslim. But if they're sincere to it. And not everyone understands this. There's a statement of Ibn Rajab rahimahullah regarding rukhsas, which is, as I would put down, an amazing piece of information here. He says rahimahullah that rukhsas, facilitations, shouldn't be passed on to the lay people, because the lay people will then take it as the complete sunnah. I'll give you an example. If someone doesn't have too much water, it is possible for them to make wudu only once, like doing every body part only one time. So they'll do their hands once, they'll face. If you teach this to children, saying that it is permissible, but the afdal is that a person should wash 3 times, you will see that the child forever will only be washing once. And this is not the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That child does that because their understanding isn't up to the level where they realize that this is a rukhsa and this is not what we should be doing. And sometimes even that I've heard people say that didn't the Prophet ﷺ teach us to preserve water? Which is true, and then they make a connection, they say therefore we should only do wudu once, like we shouldn't wipe 3 times. They're doing an analogy right there, and they're confused because the person who commanded us to do 3 times is the one that told us to preserve water. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So a person's logical argument cannot contradict what the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said. And that person's logic is cancelled and rejected when it comes against the statement and the commandment of the Prophet ﷺ and the way that he acted. In the Al-Maghrib class, because it's an accredited class, this is just, I'm giving you like a real life situation, I speak in a different way. I'll start teaching students in a more stricter way and start teaching them the etiquettes of being students, in addition to actually what they're learning in the class. And I would not do that in a Friday khutbah. So in a Friday khutbah I would be saying some things and I would desist from saying other things. And then something like this class, I'll also desist from doing certain things because I know it's at a different level. And then when I would do the Al-Maghrib Institute class, I'm taking it at different levels because I realize that someone who's coming into an accredited class and is being serious and is going for a long term is different than someone who's just coming in casually. And the speaker and the teacher has to understand that also, that not everyone is at the same level. So if someone's not understanding something, they should change the way that they're speaking to something that the person does understand, and not confuse them, because it could go against that person. This is point number 2. This is an example, like the point here is speaking at the intellectual level at the listener. This one here is that examples of how the Prophet ﷺ would speak at the intellectual level of the listener, because of the different situation of the one who's asking the question. So the hadith of the person that came and asked the Prophet ﷺ about kissing while fasting, and the Prophet ﷺ gave permission to one person and didn't give permission to another. And then when they asked about this, the Prophet ﷺ said that the difference was that one of the people who was asking was a senior person, and the other one who was asking was like a newly married person. So this one who's older has more control over themselves versus someone. And the Prophet ﷺ, it changed based on the situation of the person that was asking. The question of jihad fi sabilillah, you will see all the ayat and ahadith speaking about jihad and the encouragement of jihad. And then a person comes and he wants to go for jihad, and the Prophet ﷺ said, are your parents alive? He said yes. He said فَفِيهِمَا فَجَاهِدْ. He said, go and do jihad in the kind treatment of your parents. So the Prophet ﷺ, if you look at the situation of the person who is asking, most likely that he had a situation where he might not be the best candidate to be doing jihad. So there might be another jihad, something more preferable in his specific sense, that he would be more rewarded from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the answers to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when people would ask, awsini, guide me or give me advice, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would give many different answers. And I'll just give you an example of a man that came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, awsini, give me advice. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, qala la taghdab, don't get angry. And the man asked him again, give me more advice. And the Prophet ﷺ said, la taghdab, don't get angry. Which, subhanallah, that advice, I think so many people can benefit from it. Qala la taghdab. And the person asked again and again, and the Prophet ﷺ kept telling him again and again, qala la taghdab. Did the Prophet ﷺ say that to everyone who asked him for advice? No, he didn't. Someone else will ask, awsini, and he would answer with something else. So in all of those answers, what we're realizing is that the Prophet ﷺ, he would look at the situation of the person that's asking the question, and then he would answer ﷺ based on what is the best advice for this person. Some more examples, this is number 2 also, of how the Prophet ﷺ would pay attention to the intellectual level of the person and what position they're in, is the question of ayyul a'mali afdal, which action is most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I just want to give you an example that I felt in Hajj. When we went for Hajj this year, and I was one of the Hajj guides with the ISNA Hajj group, I was telling the people in my group that to not settle for a passing grade in Hajj. Not settle for a passing grade, meaning that don't just try doing the minimum in Hajj, that all these people are competing with you for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we see Allah Azza wa Jalla saying, سَابِقُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ, and how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum would, even if they had one person who was better than them, they would still fight and put in their effort in order to do more good than even just that one person. And so as I was doing this, I told them this in Hajj, that if the person in the street is making dua so long, then don't think that because you have a nice air-conditioned tent that Allah loves you more. It's not true. Because here in Hajj, everybody's equal. The person who does more ibadat and is more sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever tent they're in and whatever clothes they have, they're the ones who are most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in my thought process, I felt that when I said that the people would answer back to me asking the question, how do we get a higher mark than other people? How do we beat other people? Under the table, give us a little bit more. What do we do? So I thought, okay, then what is the best thing that we can do in Hajj? And then the Arabic question formed in my mind, ayyul a'mali ahabbu ilallah, which actions are most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if you noticed, the Sahaba would ask this question often, because they wanted to beat the others. So they would say, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love the most? We know this is good and this is good and this is good. What's most beloved to Allah Azza wa Jal? So that we can get closer to Allah Azza wa Jal from their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you'll see in some ahadith that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, someone would ask him and he would answer it'am al-ta'am, to feed people, feed the hungry. And maybe that person was wealthy and they had wealth, and in their case the most beloved thing for them to do would be to feed the people. Another person, the Prophet ﷺ would say to not harm others. What action is the best? And he would say, ayyul muslimina khair, or ayyul islami khair. And the Prophet ﷺ said, man salima al-muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi. Who the other Muslims are safe and protected from his tongue and from his hands. And so you see that the answer is now changing based on the person who's asking. Another person will ask, Ayyul a'mali afdal. The Prophet ﷺ said, Imanun billahi wa rasulih, to have iman in Allah and His Messenger. All of these things, the Prophet ﷺ paying attention to who is it that's asking. And sometimes when someone asks me a question, the first thing that I would do is ask them in reply about 5 other questions. And some people might misunderstand why I'm asking these questions. Someone will ask a question, for example, what's the issue regarding this? And I would ask them in reply, what country are you from? And someone who might not understand where I'm coming from, they might think that I'm trying to get married or something like that. When you understand the nationality, sometimes there's also different cultures that come with that nationality. So specifically with the halal meat issue, I will always ask the person what nationality they're from. And their nationality will tell me their opinion. And I won't continue from there. I will change my answer, not change the answer, but I would direct the answer in different directions based on the answers that I get from that person. So some person maybe or has the issue already determined in their mind. So why are they asking me? They're seeking confirmation. They're like, yes, that's exactly what I thought. But what I'm doing basically is, it's just like I said, just a confirmation for it. So if they've already determined it, there's really no reason to ask the shaykh. And as the adab of like a student of knowledge, the etiquette is that if you already know the answer to something, do not ask the shaykh, because that would be disrespectful. If you've already determined it and you don't care what the shaykh is saying, then don't ask. And I can tell when someone, when they ask their question, they'll say, isn't this haram? Or they'll say, this is haram, right? Like that. They won't put it as a question, they'll put it as a statement. And I would say, well, if you've already determined it, why haven't you asked? Actually, there's a brother that came and asked me a question. And they're little confused questions. One of them, he disagreed with someone else. And I said that the person that you disagreed with actually is correct. And he didn't like that. He told me, I think Sheikh so-and-so has a different opinion. And I said, well, why are you asking me if Sheikh so-and-so has a different opinion? But I let it go. Then he asked another question, and I agreed with him on the second question. And he's a funny brother. Then someone else came on our table, and then they said, did you get your 2 questions answered? And he goes, one of them. He got one of them answered, the other one, he's still waiting for the confirmation. So a person should know who it is that's asking. Sometimes someone will ask a question regarding some very simple issue in Islam, but you may realize that because of this simple issue, they're missing out on a lot of the furud, and they're focusing on something that's very simple when they could be focusing on things that are more important. And actually that's coming as one of the techniques that the Prophet ﷺ would use. So if a teacher sees this and someone is explaining, someone's asking a question, I would ask them, why are you asking this question? And they'll say, because of this and this. And they'll say, for example, that I'm trying to give da'wah to this person, and I'm trying to tell him why it's so important to use miswak, and he doesn't agree. And then I would say in reply, does this person pray? And they'll say no. And then you realize, you just asking a simple question like that, you'd say, listen, this is my advice to you. True, you should use miswak or something, but work on the salah, talk to this person about this and this and that. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. But that's the fiqh of understanding the person that's asking. The third technique, تعليمه صلى الله عليه وسلم بالحوار والمساءلة, using questions and debate. And as it says there, that it's one of the most popular techniques that you will see in the books of Sunnah, that the Prophet ﷺ would use. And these are some examples here. One of the most popular techniques, and as teachers know that a teacher can make a statement to a child, and they haven't learned, because basically the child just has to, memorize what was said. But when a teacher evokes the child's thinking and says, what do you guys think about this? And good teachers know that this is the way to teach. Let the student come to that conclusion themselves, and they will learn. But if they are told, they will just forget what was said. And so the Prophet ﷺ would say, and this hadith is well known, how would it be or what would the situation be of someone who has a river at their door, and every day, 5 times a day, they come out and they take a bath in that river? At the end of the day, would they have any dirt on them? This is the question the Prophet ﷺ asked the companions radiallahu anhum, and many of you know this hadith. And they said there would be no dirt on him, Ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet ﷺ said, similarly are the 5 salawat, cleansing the person in this way. So the question, he asked them the question, and they would reply like this. In this second hadith, another example, the Prophet ﷺ said, Man al-Muslim, who is the Muslim? And we have definition, the one who has submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. You see it every time someone goes on TV, they're like, Islam means peace and submission. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Muslim man salima al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadih. That the Muslim is the one, and he went to the literal of the word salima, who other people are at peace from his hands and his tongue. Man salima al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadih. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, Man al-Muhajir, who is the Muhajir? And this is the one who emigrated from Mecca to Medina. The Prophet ﷺ said, Man hajara ma nahallahu an. That the person who emigrates and goes away from those things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. And so you'll see this, the people don't forget. In fact, subhanAllah, in this hadith, Man salim al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadih, we taught it in the Islamic school. And the children learned it so well that when they went back home and their parents started beating them, they said the hadith, Al-Muslimu man salim al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadih. And the parent who may know the hadith, may not, but then they were shocked, you know, that the child would say something like this. If you're a Muslim, then I should be safe from your hands and from your tongue. And in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, Man al-Muflis, who is the bankrupt person. And so many people, who's bankrupt? Everybody here would say the person who has no dollars and no coins, right? A person who doesn't have money is the bankrupt person. Our focus is always on that money. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, it's the person who comes on the day of judgment with all these good deeds, and he hit this person and he cursed that person, and they start taking from their good deeds. Until they have no good deeds left, they go bankrupt. And then those people start giving them the bad deeds, and then until the person is finally thrown into hellfire. So again, it was a debate, and the Prophet ﷺ doing back and forth, question and answers with the people he was speaking to. And I know in a lot of khutbahs, or when we give lectures, the speaker might not do this, or a teacher in Islamic school might not speak like this, or a parent to their children, they may not ask questions. And subhanAllah, these questions, they're so important. I've seen books written on how to create the question so that it will provoke the thinking of the person. I'll just give you an example of 2 children, and one of the children is playing with a toy. He says, my toy is my toy. And the other child starts crying. They go, ah, waiting for the parents to come and take the toy. So what happens is most parents would grab the toy from the child who's been hogging the toy and taking it the whole time, and say that, no, you've been playing with it this whole time, and it's time for this other child to play with it. Give it to them. So it's ripped out of the child's hand, given to the second child. The first one who had it ripped out will start crying, just as loud or louder than the first one that was crying. And then when the parent's gone, what will he do, or what will she do? Just take your fist and knock out that child who got the toy now, right? And then the toy gets dropped, and then both come up and they both get a beating or are sent to the house. This is normally how the issue is resolved, correct? And everybody's smiling because they've done this to people, to little kids. Let me just give you another scenario. What a parent could do. I believe the book is it's called How to Raise Thinking Children, or How to Raise a Thinking Child. If the parent or the teacher goes up to that child and says calmly, okay, one child's name is Zayd, one child's name is Amr. You go up to Zayd and you say, Zayd, is it fair that you play with the toy all the time and Amr plays it for no time? Doesn't get any time to play with it? Just say it calmly, politely. What would the child answer? How could the child answer? He has to answer in fairness. They would say, yes, it is fair because it's my toy, or something like that. Say it again. Is it fair that you play with the toy the whole time and Amr doesn't get to play with it any of the time? The child has to think. I know a lot of Islamic school teachers, what they do is that when someone's doing something wrong, they say to them, why are you talking in class? Does that teacher really care about the answer? No, the teacher doesn't care about the answer, which is incorrect. If you're going to ask a question, listen to the answer. Or even set up a different, it's called, you're setting up a menu. Give them solutions. Tell the child, for example, are you talking in class because you're bored? Or are you talking in class because you have something to say? And the child, it could be one of the two, or they'll say, no, I'm talking in class because I wanted to know what you were saying in class. You would provoke an answer from the person, and they'll start thinking about what you're saying. And that's the power of asking the proper questions and getting that child thinking. And so again, if you do ask a question, then listen to the answer. Give the person a chance, because if we raise them on rhetorical questions, why are you talking in class, get out, and not allowing them to speak, then they will not answer questions and they will not think. They will just think, oh boy, I'm in trouble, and they will not use their minds.
You've reached the conclusion of this CD. Take the opportunity to evaluate yourself by going to ilmquest.org, where you will find a short quiz on the content of this presentation. That's www.ilmquest.org. The presentation will continue on the next CD. Welcome to an IlmQuest presentation. 21 teaching techniques of Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, presented by Muhammad Asharif. Part 2.
The fourth point, or the fourth technique, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or this point is ta'limu sallallahu alaihi wasallam bil maqayasati wa tamthil, which is basically using analogies. I give the example of cash fard and credit fard. Does anybody know what cash fard and credit fard is? Okay, cash fard and credit fard, you shouldn't know them because I made up the terms. You shouldn't know them, but if you know usul al-fiqh, you'll know that something that's cash is like, or something that's credit fard is fard fi dhimma. And the cash fard is basically something that you have to do right now. And the example that of this is that, for example, if a person's traveling in Ramadan, it's fard for them to fast. Now the fact that they're fasting, traveling, does that mean that it's not fard anymore? No, it doesn't. It's still fard, but it's fard fi dhimma. It means they're on a debit. They owe this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So after Ramadan they have to make it up, and it maintains its fard status. And so I called it a credit fard. A cash fard is something that a person has to do right here, right now. And this is like an amazing piece of information for you guys right here, that if someone misses Fajr, what happens in their mind is they think that it's a credit fard. They say, now that I've missed Fajr, I've automatically gotten myself an extra 6 hours to pray Fajr. From that time all the way till Dhuhr. And so when do they pray Fajr? At 11:58 a.m. Even though they're awake and they're having breakfast and so on. Because they think that it's a credit fard fi dhimma. But they don't realize that they have to do it right now. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man nama an salatin aw nasiyaha falyusalliha idha dhakaraha." The commandment is that they have to pray it as soon as they wake up, or as soon as they remember that they missed that prayer. It's a cash fard. So I made this analogy, and this is the class that's actually coming to Houston, which is the Usul al-Fiqh class, the Code of Scholars. And then I noticed on the exam that the students started calling things cash fard and credit fard. And then I said, no, I made up those terms. This is not what I'm trying to tell you. And they'll say that, I don't remember what you said in class, but I remember cash fard and credit fard. And I have bucket seat fard, and I have football field fard, and different things like that. Community fard, and a personal fard, and so on. There's all these different types of fard. But actually in the Arabic, we think of it as a kind of like a Greek term, like it's just, we don't understand what's meant. But an Arabic person actually understands fi dhimma as credit. It's owed. So the person who doesn't know Arabic may just memorize them as terms, but those terms have meaning. They have meaning. So using analogy, like I said, from my experience, that the people were able to grasp it and continue to use the points after the class because an analogy was made to something that they understand. The hadith of the woman that came and asked the Prophet ﷺ about her mother who made an oath to do Hajj and she died. And then she asked the Prophet ﷺ, should I do Hajj on her behalf? Normally someone would just answer with a fatwa, yes, you have to do Hajj on her behalf. What did the Prophet ﷺ say to her? He said ﷺ that if your mother had any debts, would you pay that on her behalf? And the woman said yes. And again, this goes back to, I'll just show you, using questions in debate. The Prophet ﷺ replied her with a question. He said, if your mother had any debts, would you pay off her debts? And she said yes. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, فَدَيْنُ اللَّهِ أَحَقُّ بِالْقَضَاءِ, that the debt owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more worthy of being fulfilled and more worthy of being paid off. And so when a person understands that, I'm sure many of you, when you read this hadith, you now understand this, the seriousness. If someone dies and tells their children, do Hajj on my behalf, you would consider it as a debt because the Prophet ﷺ compared it to a real financial debt that the person would have to pay off. This hadith, the next hadith, is another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ was asked from the companions, ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور, where they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they were complaining. Remember back when we were speaking how the companions radiallahu anhum were always looking for the most beloved actions. So they were doing the most beloved actions and the other companions were doing the most beloved actions, but then the companion who was wealthy was spending his wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they didn't have the money to spend. They didn't have that. They weren't sad because they didn't have a house like the other person, and they weren't sad because they didn't have a car like the other person. They were sad because they couldn't give sadaqah like that wealthy person. And so they complained to the Prophet ﷺ. Look at the complaint. They're complaining because they want to vie for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also. As they said, يُصَلُّونَ كَمَا نُصَلِّي, they pray like we pray, they fast like we fast. وَيَتَصَدَّقُونَ with the wealth that's remaining from what they have. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, didn't Allah give to you that which you can give sadaqah with? And then the Prophet ﷺ said, saying subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, this is all sadaqah. And then the Prophet ﷺ saying, even the marital relations that a person has with his wife is sadaqah. And then they said, Ya Rasulullah, how can someone have a marital relation and this is their own desire and they're getting rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then the Prophet ﷺ answered with an analogy. He said sallallahu alayhi wasallam that didn't you see that if you did this in haram, wouldn't you be susceptible to punishment and be blameworthy for it? And they said yes. And then the Prophet ﷺ said similarly, that if you do it in halal, then you should be worthy of reward for that. And then they understood. And just the continuation of the hadith, that those wealthy people also heard the hadith. And they went and they did the subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. They did all of that also. And then they came back to the Prophet ﷺ and they complained again. And the Prophet ﷺ said in reply, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. This is the virtue and the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives to whoever He wishes. What's interesting here is that you can be the richest person in sadaqah because nobody does these things anymore. No one goes to work in the morning, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. They're listening to the radio, they're listening to this. You could be beating every single person on the beltway in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. And just something, just so it's a little bit easier, try to tell yourself in the morning when you go off for your 2-hour commute, say to yourself that before I turn on the radio, before I do anything else, let me just say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar 100 times. Just say it. Believe me, before you get onto any beltway or any major highway, you'll be done. And you pile these things up almost like someone who's exercising every single morning, and their body would reflect the benefit from what they're doing. Similarly, this person will be reaping in the rewards. Every day they're giving sadaqah with their remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another example, I'm just giving you analogies. One of the things with the analogies, and for those who were at the lecture that I was giving about the mountain, Al-Aqaba, I said that the Prophet ﷺ, many of the ahadith, he would compare it to Jabal Uhud. And even today, some person might give another example and they would say that something in the weight of Jabal Uhud. And half of you may not have seen Jabal Uhud. How many people have seen Jabal Uhud? So I'd say more than half have not seen Jabal Uhud. So if I made an analogy to Jabal Uhud, you would not understand my analogy. You don't know how big the mountain is. But when the Prophet ﷺ would say it to someone, all they had to do is like listen to the Prophet ﷺ and go like this, and know what he was talking about. There's no tall buildings, there's no Hilton and Sheraton blocking the view. Someone can look directly, they'll see Jabal Uhud. They're like, all that in reward? Yes, it meant something to him. When I was young, some person came and they started telling us an example. And they said, imagine if you're boiling milk. And then I said, we don't boil milk here. Our milk is fresh, they boil it for us. But he said, obviously he's coming from a different country. He said, imagine if you're boiling milk and someone drops one droplet of urine in the milk. And then we're like, ew. I said, number one, we don't boil our milk. And number two, nobody drops urine in a pot of milk. So, and I remember, I understand what the person's saying, but no one could comprehend this analogy. This does not happen. And the analogy, subhanAllah, if someone is just a little bit creative, and someone gave me another analogy that was similar to this. They said, imagine if you've been drinking a bottle of vanilla Coke, and there's a little bit of the Coke left in the bottle, and someone says, you want some milk? And you say, yeah, give me some milk. Or you say, you want some water? Yeah, let me put it. If you pour it into the bottle and there's already Coke in it, what will happen to the milk? It would like curd up and get disgusting, right? And everybody understands it. I'm sure every single person has done that. You've been to an iftar dinner and you've been having Coke, and then someone says, would you like some water? And you say, yeah, give me some water. And then they're like, oh no, we didn't know that there was Coke in that cup. So everybody's done it. And this is the exact same analogy. It's the exact same analogy, but something that people can comprehend versus something that they can't comprehend will make the difference in them understanding what you're saying versus not understanding what you're saying. The example of the football. In the UK, I had the opportunity, last summer was my first trip to the UK, and alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity, like many times I go to conferences, and people know that I'm giving the speeches. So I don't get the feeling of what a newcomer would feel when they come to conferences. And I get a little biased in how the conference is going. Because people will be saying salam to me, but someone who's new, I don't know how they feel. So when I went to the UK, nobody in the conference knew that I was giving the lecture. So the first day, about the first 2 days, I was testing everybody because I was going to, mention it in my speech. How nice they were to me before they actually knew that I was going to be giving the lectures. So one of the things that happened to me is that one of the lectures that was happening, what happens in lectures is that the kids skip the lectures and they go play basketball. And all you have to do is stand out in the hallway and listen to how they're talking. One child will say, man, this is an exciting lecture, which rarely happens. But the other child says, come on, let's go play basketball. And they'll say, yeah, sounds good. Who would ever, and I'm thinking that this may be a downfall of the basketball course that we bring to our masjid. Who would ever come attend a boring lecture if they could play basketball? I'll give you a better example. If you have a snack time and you put donuts and you put apples, who will ever eat the apples? It's not possible that they will eat the apples. They'll see a chocolate covered donut and they'll say, let me eat an apple. It won't happen. The donuts will finish. The person will always take what's easier and more enjoyable for them. And so it's almost like you have to close those nets so that the people will be forced to come into lecture. And we don't want to force people, but inshallah our hope is to make the classes more exciting. I was in Maryland, and this brother was, some sheikh was giving a speech after Asr, a weekly Halaqa that he does. And then when I was walking out of the masjid, I saw that one of the children, whose father was part of the masjid, tell the other kids, come on, let's go play basketball. And then I said, why are you encouraging them to leave the masjid? You should encourage them to go into the masjid and attend the lecture. And then I looked at him, he's about maybe 6 years old. And then I said, sincerely, I go, it is pretty boring lecture, huh? And he goes, yeah, it is. And I said, I know what you mean. These kids, I'm just giving you an example. In the UK, these same Muslim children, they're speaking to one another, skipping the lecture. But they say, instead of, let's go play basketball, I heard them say, come on, let's play some football. And the guy's like, no, I won't listen to the lecture. And the other kid's saying, no, let's play football, come on. Football meaning soccer, you know that, right? And so I thought, subhanAllah, if these kids were in America at an ISTA conference, they would be talking about basketball. But over there, they're not talking about basketball. And I realized that they're just a product of their environment. They like soccer because they're in the UK. And we're indoctrinated with basketball, and that's why we like basketball here. Because we're indoctrinated it. And you don't like hockey as much as Canadians do, because in Canada we have so much ice, and the people are indoctrinated. If you're not, you're not Canadian unless you like hockey. And that's the way things work. So when someone's giving an analogy, if they're so focused on soccer, imagine giving an analogy regarding soccer. Everybody would understand what you're saying. As opposed to giving an example regarding cricket, and then only certain countries don't understand what that is. I'll just give you an example. What's it called? There's a company that makes sports games. EA Sports, right? Do you guys know EA Sports? I'm asking the kids, and the adults are saying, yeah, we know. EA Sports, in America, have you ever seen EA Sports cricket? You have virtual players, and the guy goes like this and throws the ball like that. Have you ever seen anybody seen EA Sports cricket? It's not here in the US. That's what I'm trying to say. It's in the UK, and I'm sure the ones that came from Pakistan were bootleg copies. Am I correct? They were, yeah. They were bootleg copies of those UK games. What I'm saying is that's just their culture. They love this game. And when EA Sports makes it, they don't put it even at all on the shelves here, because they know no one would ever care about this. Next point, number 5. تعليمه صلى الله عليه وسلم بالرسم على الأرض والتراب. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم is teaching people using drawings, or drawing on the earth or on the dust. And these two diagrams here are diagrams that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم drew in the sand. The first diagram, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he made a straight line through the sand, and then after that he made lines to the right and lines to the left, and then the Prophet ﷺ then mentioned verses relating to Sabilullah, that this is the Sabil of Allah. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُ السُّبُلْ فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ, and do not follow the other paths, as it will distract you and divide you from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the Prophet ﷺ would say the verse, and then the people were looking down at the drawing in the sand. So when if a teacher or someone's explaining something, if they ever get a chance to make a diagram of what they're talking about, the people who are visual and will remember things, and most likely, if there's something visual, their chances and their increase, or their the percentage of them understanding what's being said and remembering it will go up. Basically, if there's a lecture that's only in audio, meaning the people are just listening, they're not interacting, no nothing, they'll basically get 20%, they'll remember about 20% of what happened. If visual is introduced, like the fact that we're putting up a PowerPoint here, your remembrance might go up to 60%. Do you know what kicks up the remembering higher than that? The third one is to do an activity. That little quiz at the end, some people may not think that it's that important, but that will increase your retention up to 80% if you get involved with what you're learning. And so this is just an example of how the Prophet ﷺ would draw in the sand. Alhamdulillah, these things are so easily available to us, whether it's a blackboard or a marker board, or even just putting up a piece of paper, or even gathering the students around, showing them a notebook. The fact that they get to step out of their chair, they're getting involved. They're like, wow, we get to sit out of our chairs. And they huddle around the teacher, and then the teacher makes a drawing, and one child says, I can't see the drawing. And then they're listening, but there's a drawing involved, not just a lecture and everybody has to sit in their desk. In this other diagram that the Prophet ﷺ drew, he drew a box, and then he drew a line going from the middle of the box outside of the box, and then he drew other lines that were cutting into that line, as you see there. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the middle is the person, and that line going out is the hopes, the amal of that human being. So they want to live forever, they want to, 1,000 years, they want their they want to win that lottery, $300 million and so on. That's their amal that goes beyond the box. The box is the qadr. It's their destiny, that they're going to die, and their ajal, what's written for them, that they're going to live this amount of time. And those arrows that are coming to the person, or the lines that are coming against the person, they're the different, like you say, awarid, which are, things that will happen in a person's life. For example, I'll just give you an example. Someone may have the amal, or the desire, that they're going to be a great hockey player. So they're in college hockey, and the first minute that they go out onto the ice, someone slams them into the board, and they were too far from the board, their spine gets snapped, and they're forever paralyzed. Even though their own amal was outside, those lines came in and cut into it. If one of them misses, the other one will hit the person. And it changes that person what they were planning for. And so the Prophet ﷺ gave this example, and I think even when you see these drawings, especially the box one, when I hear about people, and myself when we're talking about desires, things that I want to do, we realize that there's a box that is cutting off those desires. And that's our ajal, how long we've been decreed to live here on earth. Number 6, جمعه صلى الله عليه وسلم بين القول والإشارة في التعليم. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam joining between statements and hand movements, signals, while he would talk, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in teaching people. The first hadith, which is well known, every time there's a fundraiser, someone does this. They raise their hands and they go like this, they join their fingers, and they say that the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَا وَكَافِلُ الْيَتِيمِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ كَهَاتَيْنِ, that myself and the one who takes care of the orphans is in paradise like this. The Prophet ﷺ showed his fingers being together. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, كَهَاتَيْن, he said like this. And then you see in brackets, or the narrator will then say, and then he did this. So he would use those hand movements, and it will be narrated the actions that the Prophet ﷺ said. And you'll see rarely does someone recall this hadith without following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and putting their fingers like that. Have you ever seen someone say the hadith and not use their hands? Rarely do you see that. They pick up their hands and they will copy the way the Prophet ﷺ copied. And there are other hadith where the Prophet ﷺ would use his hand movements. Another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ telling one of the companions, giving them advice, كُفَّ عَنْكَ هَذَا, and he grabbed his tongue, ﷺ, which is a very, I know in our culture, I don't know how it was in the past, but if someone grabs their tongue and holds it, it's very descriptive. It's not like telling someone, watch your tongue. If you grab your tongue and hold it, you will provoke so many emotions in the person's mind that it will be ingrained. The teacher grabbed his tongue in class and said something, that it will have much more of an effect on a person. In the farewell khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ, when at the end of his khutbah he said to the people that you're going to come on the Day of Judgment and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you about me, so what will you say? And they said that we testify that you did your mission and you did your duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قَدْ بَلَّغْتَ. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he raised his hand up and he said, Allahumma fashhad. And he would point upwards and point to the people. Allahumma fashhad, O Allah testify, O Allah testify. Hand movements that the Prophet ﷺ would use. The psychology of hand movements. This is in business. As one of the brothers was telling me, that all of these things can be used. They use it for materialistic reasons. So someone who's in business knows these things very well. But when we're coming to teaching our children about Islam, these books don't get opened. And I'll tell you this book, and it's a very amazing book to read. It's called Mind Works. Mind Works. And I went to a seminar, and this seminar was $200 for one day. For one day and just a few hours. But subhanAllah, I learned things in that day that subhanAllah, it can't be measured in money. Because that knowledge, I'd rather have the knowledge than have, Ben Franklin or something like that in my pocket. So one of the books that I benefited from the teacher that was explaining is that this book, Mind Works. What it is the NLP that I was talking about in the beginning, neurological programming. And they talk about the psychology of hand movements. If I wanted to make you comfortable, I would start imitating where your hands are. I'll just give you an example. Maybe a brother has his hand on his chin. If I go like this, does that make you feel more comfortable, or does it make you feel embarrassed? You're embarrassed because I'm embarrassing you, but if I started imitating the way the person is acting, they will feel comfortable. And so sometimes you'll see even there may be a teacher that's maybe a little bit too unlike the student, and then the students, they don't feel comfortable around that teacher. And then another teacher who just got out of university, and they're still like 23 years old, and they're a teacher and they have long hair, and they as a hobby they go skateboarding, and they're teaching Islam. Do you think he would be successful? He'd be the most successful da'i. Why? Because they feel comfortable with that person. If someone starts imitating the way people act, they will make them. And that happens with hand movements and the way people are standing and so on. So if someone's like leaning back and they have their hands on their legs and so on, if I wanted to talk to them, I could lean back, put my hands on my legs. Similarly, if I don't want to scare someone and I'm talking to them, I would stand beside them and not in front of them. In front of them has the meaning of confrontation. Standing to their side means like, we're together in this problem. So for example, if you're having a general body meeting or something like that, one person shouldn't stand on one side of the table and look down at everybody, and then a fight will break out. Instead, that person should stand beside them, get a drawing board, get a neutral person to write the points, and someone will stand to the side as if we're all together in this issue. These are just little things, but they do have an effect on people. Some people understand the psychology behind it. Other people are just natural. They say this works and this doesn't. But if you look up and research these things, inshallah ta'ala, you can be informed. You may already be doing it, but inshallah ta'ala, you'll know why you're doing it in the future. I'll just give you another example. When a teacher says, are there any questions? Are there any questions right now? Come on, raise your hand. Most likely, every single person has a question right now. But the teacher says, oh good, there's no questions, we can go home, and you'll always hear them say that you either understood everything I said or you understood nothing. You've heard that before? It's not either or. They do have questions, but they don't feel comfortable enough to ask the questions. There's too many people, they raise their hands, everybody's going to stare at them. They just don't feel comfortable. One way to make a person feel comfortable is to raise your hands. The next point, which is how the Prophet ﷺ would occasionally allow a companion to answer a question. The Arabic, تفويضه صلى الله عليه وسلم الصحابي بالجواب عما سئل عنه ليدربه. The Prophet ﷺ would occasionally, an issue would come up, and the Prophet ﷺ would have the question answered by one of the companions to train them to answer the questions. This hadith of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, which is an authentic hadith, is that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and inshallah you can look it up later, but the man said that he had a dream that there was these clouds, and they were dripping honey, and they were dripping ghee. Do you know ghee? Everybody knows ghee. I think every halal shop here has ghee in the food. And dripping like that kind of like buttery thing that they would put in the food. And he continued hadith that there was a rope and the Prophet ﷺ had climbed up the rope, and then the people had come later and one person climbed it and went up, and so and those droplets that were coming down from the clouds, that some people were collecting a lot of it and some people weren't collecting that much. And the Prophet ﷺ, before he answered the interpretation of the dream, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, Ya Rasulullah, allow me to interpret it. And the Prophet ﷺ said, go ahead, and allowed him. So you see in this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ allowed Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to answer the question, and then he said sallallahu alayhi wasallam that you were correct on some points and mistaken on some other points. And inshallah ta'ala you can, that'll encourage you to go and look up further of what did Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu interpret the dream as. There are other cases where a person would come and they would have a legal issue. They would come to the Prophet ﷺ with a legal issue, and the Prophet ﷺ would tell a certain companion to get up and to judge between them. And that companion would say, Ya Rasulullah, shall I judge between them while you're here in our midst? And the Prophet ﷺ said yes. And you actually look at these companions, they later on became Muslim judges. And they were the emirs that went out to Yemen or Egypt and other places. The Prophet ﷺ had trained them in his midst, and then they went on later to become the Qudah of Islam. This technique is a technique that if anybody studied teaching and how to teach, they consider it as a modern technique to get people to answer questions. So if a student asks a question, they'll say, teacher, what does alligator mean? Instead of the teacher saying alligator means this, the teacher, if they're smart in getting the meaning to the children, they would say, students, Suhaib is asking about what an alligator is like. Does anybody know? And then allowing the children to answer the question. They're being involved in the answer. They're getting to voice. And sometimes they'll say some things that are wrong. And the teacher will be able to correct them in something like that. But they're put on the spot, and they consider this a modern technique, but it was a technique that the Prophet ﷺ had applied. Another way it happens is that sometimes you'll see this in Arabic classes. The student becomes hasty and they want everything translated. They'll say, yeah teacher, what does this mean? Qala means say. Huwa, what does huwa mean, teacher? It means he is. Allahu ahad, what does ahad mean? And then and the teacher's always telling the person and telling. If you ask that person who asked, you'd think because so many questions were asked that the person knows all the answers. Go to that same person the next day or a week later and ask them, what does Qul Huwallahu Ahad mean? They'll say, I don't know. They asked the questions and it seemed like they were the one most involved in the class, but the teacher was just telling them, but not teaching them. The statements were told, but it doesn't mean that the child will get it in their heads. So what the teacher would do if they were smart, the child says, what does alligator mean? The teacher would say, there's a big dictionary at the back of the classroom, go and read it and tell me what you understand from that. And the student will say, like, can't you just tell me? You don't know what an alligator is? And then the teacher who's still, a freshman in teaching, they have to show and like, of course I know what an alligator is. It looks like this, and the child says, thanks. And they write it down, they go sit down. Did the child learn? No, he didn't. Did the teacher get a little nervous because of, egos and things like that? What's interesting in Medina University is that the older ulama would always have easy exams. They weren't worried about their jobs, and they weren't, they're set. Their exams are, mashallah, very beautiful, very easy to answer. But, God forbid if you get a freshman teacher that has to make his stake on the scene. The questions, because they don't know what questions are too hard, what questions are too easy, that they get the most crazy questions that no one would ever be able to answer, and then people fail and stuff like that. I'm sure you've seen a lot of Saturday school teachers like that, and the person with their experience, they learn how to not take it personally, but push it on to the students to answer the questions themselves. Technique number 12, انتهازه صلى الله عليه وسلم المناسبات العارضة في التعليم. In this technique number 12, it's how the Prophet ﷺ would take advantage of special occasions. And this is a little bit, it might be unclear about what's meant by special occasions. I'm going to explain it a little at the bottom there where it says anniversary speeches, because that's not necessarily what's meant. The Prophet ﷺ, and I'll just give you an example amongst people. If I told you, or suppose that this seminar today was going to be about Hajj, how many of you would have still come to listen to me speak about Hajj? Raise your hands if you still would have come. A Hajj workshop, and I'll show you how to put on ihram and how to do Safa Marwa and so on. Jazakallah khair. The loyals. This is the 10% that will always love whatever is said, and they're still good now, alhamdulillah. This, in comparison, now suppose even in Hajj, I keep telling the people that, because I work as a Hajj instructor in Hajj, and I tell them that I swear that we're going to be answering questions tonight that you will have after Hajj, when it's too late, when you're going to have to pay penalties. But I'm going to be explaining it right now. You missed tonight's lecture, and you're going to have to pay a penalty at the end of Hajj, there's no doubt about it. And the people still won't come at the end of Hajj. Ya Shaykh, this happened in the Jamarat, and this happened. Okay, go slaughter a sheep. Remember that lecture you missed? And they're like, yeah, we missed. So even actually 4 days before Hajj, people still aren't attending Hajj workshops. They won't attend the Hajj workshop until they've made the mistake. Then they attend, like, can you tell us what we're supposed to do here in Arafah? They'll ask it in Arafah, and they won't know they'll actually get there. So that's an occasion. So a person, you'll have the attention of the people. If they're on Arafah and someone's explaining what the Prophet ﷺ did on this day, background of the day of Arafah, the people, you will have all their attention. They will listen. Take it out of occasion and start talking about the same issue, the people will not be paying attention. And so that's the hikmah of the da'i, to see when the occasion comes up, when the students will benefit. Teachers call it a learning moment. A learning moment is when maybe an interesting question comes up from a student, and the teacher might have the curriculum in front of them, but because of this moment and the question the child brought up, everybody's paying attention to this. I'll just give you an example. Suppose two children, they get into a very large fight at recess time. So much so that one of them swore at the other, and the other one took a rock and hit the child in the head. And the child had to be taken to the hospital. Doesn't happen every day, and if it does, you have a problem in your school. But if this comes up, and then the teacher takes this moment, brings the children up, they have like a group hug or something like this, and then the teacher opens the ayat, suppose in Surah Al-Hujurat, of how a believer is with his Muslim brother. And he said, look at these verses. I say, can you read this for us? And when the child will read it, and like, subhanAllah, I never knew this. And their friend is in the hospital at the moment, even though that teacher might say, okay, this is our tafsir class, and I'm supposed to be covering something else, this is an occasion that the people will be paying attention to, and it might have more benefit than what the person is preparing. Hadith of the roadkill, there was, I believe, a goat that the Prophet ﷺ had passed by, and this goat had a deformity in its ears, and it was dead. And people were walking by, no one was paying attention to it. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, look at this. He said, which one of you would buy this for such and such amount of money? And they said, Ya Rasulullah, even if it was alive, no one would want to pay money for it. Because of the deformity, no one would care about it. Then how much more so since it's dead? It's dead now, it's a carcass. Even if it was alive, it wouldn't be worth very much. And now that it's dead, it's worthless. And I'm saying roadkill here because who cares about roadkill? Does anybody find a deer that's smashed into and they said, oh, yummy deer meat, and they stop their car and take it home? It's roadkill. Nobody cares about it. And the Prophet ﷺ said that verily that the dunya is more worthless to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than this animal to you. Just like you don't care about this, that in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this dunya isn't more worthy than this. It's an occasion that they were passing by, and the Prophet ﷺ took it as a moment to teach them about what the dunya should mean in our lives. The hadith of the woman throwing her child into the fire, and you would say, no woman throws her child into the fire. This woman, where she had lost her child for such a long period of time, a nursing child, and if the child goes too long away from its mother, it could die. And so when the mother finally found the child, she grabbed it and immediately started feeding the child. And the companions, radiallahu anhum, they were looking and amazed at the immense love of this mother. And that's the kind of, I'm just giving you a little example of when you see the love of a mother for her children. Sometimes you see it in animals. You'll see maybe a female cat, and it has like 10 babies, right? And you see the love of the mother to the kittens, and the way that it protects it, the way it takes care of it. So they saw this love of the mother to the baby. The Prophet ﷺ, at that moment, he said, do you imagine that this woman would throw this child into the fire, burn it alive? And they said, Ya Rasulullah, she would never do it so long as she's capable of protecting the child from that. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that indeed Allah is more merciful to His slaves than this woman to her child. An occasion. In a hadith of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the Prophet ﷺ, it was a full moon, and the Prophet ﷺ said that verily you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of resurrection, just as you see Al-Qamra Laylat al-Badr, the moon on the night of its fullest. So the moon. Anniversary speeches are a little different than special occasions. What's meant by anniversary speeches is a speech that is given every single year at the same time. So a person says that, oh, today is a birthday, or today is something like this. Just for example, the Battle of Badr. Someone will say that on this day, the Battle of Badr, therefore as Muslims we should speak about the Battle of Badr today. And it becomes almost like a tradition that on this day of the year that the speech is to be given about the Battle of Badr, which isn't what's meant here. Because the Battle of Badr speech can be given the day before, the day after, a month later, it still has the meaning. But when they attach an institutionalization of making a speech on a specific day, it's called sabab, which we learn in Usul al-Fiqh. It's a cause, and only Allah is the lawmaker. So this day of the year is a sabab to do something else. Only Allah can tell us what is a sabab for something else. So for example, when the sun sets, it's Maghrib time. That's a sabab for Salat al-Maghrib. A person can't make up a sabab. They can't say that at 12 o'clock midnight we will pray Isha. They invented that themselves. Only Allah can make the sabab. And so similarly, if someone attaches something, and the reason I say institutionalization, because at the same time, if a certain day comes up, doesn't mean that it's haram to just speak about the Battle of Badr, because there's no forbiddance and no commandment. It's institutionalization, where every year the person will come up and say, you know, it's that time of year where we give this speech. And that's what's meant by the institutionalization. Allah Ta'ala A'lam. Point number, or technique 13, تعليمه صلى الله عليه وسلم بالممازحة والمداعبة, using playful fun. And out of the techniques that is like so foreign to our communities, you might see that this technique isn't there. This actually came to my mind from the question that the brother was asking about how is it that if someone is explaining like tafsir and the children aren't listening, that how do you get them to listen? Something came to my mind after that, and it was point number 1, which was do not bore the listener. Even though the information is important, if you give information in a 4-hour lecture, all of it's Quran and Sunnah, but you're boring them. So you have to turn it around and say, maybe I should cut this short for the benefit of them loving what I'm saying. Or if a tafsir class and they're not listening, and believe, this is what I love about children, is that if you're boring or if the teacher's boring, they will tell you. They will not hide it. They will tell you straight up. They will just start talking, and they will go boring in class. So you're like, Jazakallah khairan, and then you should move on. So the children talking in class, they are telling you that this lecture is boring. So now the person could have, like we said, they might have an ego. They're like, no, this is important information. You're going to learn boring stuff. And they'll attach it. And one of the, I'm going to talk about this later, is the downfalls of the Saturday schools is that it comes at the time of the Saturday morning cartoons. So you're competing with Batman and you're competing with Superman, and you're teaching, and they're getting these classes. It's a very dangerous setup to have. Anyhow, the science of smiling. If I said to you, for example, if I smiled, really, I have like big cheeks and stuff. If I said, I hate you all. Okay, you laughed. And I could change my tone of voice and I could make you guys cry. Or even hate me in return. But why did you laugh? Because I was smiling. You don't know why you laughed. But it was because of the smile that you cannot hate someone that's smiling at you. Even if their words contradict what they're saying, you have to love them. You have to love them. And even, subhanAllah, some of the Christian priests, they may be speaking the worst kufr. And they're talking shirk, but they're smiling all the time. And people, they just can't attach hating what a person's saying to someone who's smiling. If someone is smiling, they have to love that person. And they actually have to go beyond that technique and realize what is this person saying, even if he's smiling. But the technique itself. Now when people give da'wah, they may think that from their taqwa to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to frown at everyone. And I'm saying they feel that they're being rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for showing hatred. And I asked some of the ulama regarding this. There was a man who came to the home of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was a very evil person. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Aisha radiallahu anha of how evil this person was. When that man came into the home of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam smiled at him. So you'd imagine if something is so bad, you should show anger, correct? It should show anger, but the Prophet ﷺ smiled, and this actually intrigued Aisha radiallahu anha, that when this man left, she asked the Prophet ﷺ after what he said, and then he went and he smiled at the person. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna lanabtasimu fi wujuhi unasin wa qulubuna tal'anuhum." The Prophet ﷺ said that verily, that we smile in the faces of some people and our hearts curse them. Allahu alam, I believe it was Aisha radiallahu anha, but we'll see. The hadith of Abu Umair radiallahu anhu, who was a young boy. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam visited him in his home. This is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not a principal of an Islamic school, not even an imam. It's Rasulullah, the messenger of Allah. He's going to the home, and Anas radiallahu anhu, he begins the hadith by saying that the Prophet ﷺ had the best khuluq out of everyone. And then he began this hadith of how the Prophet ﷺ went and visited Abu Umair, who's a young boy. And what was the situation? Abu Umair's bird had died. So just like his pet. And you know people have dogs here, right? And when the dog dies, you don't understand why, but it's as if a family member has died. Right? They love them so much. This is a young boy, and it's not dogs, obviously we don't have dogs, but he has a young pet bird, and the bird died, and the Prophet ﷺ came to give his condolences ﷺ to the young boy. The fact that he visited the boy, and the reason he said, Ya Aba Umair, ma fa'ala Nughayr. Nughayr isn't the name of the bird. I believe the bird is Nughr, right? Or Nughr. Nughayr is when if you tell a boy, suppose a boy's name is Muhammad, and you go Hamoudi. Alright, come here. Anybody call kids like that? I know Lebanese call them. You do? Hamoudi. And the kid, he feels beloved. Even though his name is not Hamoudi, his name might be Muhammad. But it's like, in here it's like tasghir. It's to play with the words. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he even rhymed it with him. Ya Abu Umair ma fa'ala Nughayr. Your young little bird. And the bird had died. And the Prophet ﷺ had the greatest character ﷺ by playing and joking with those children. And there might be other situations where the Prophet ﷺ would spray water in the face of some children. Like some adults would never do anything like that. But imagine a kid, the Prophet ﷺ sprayed water in his face. Would that kid ever not love the Prophet ﷺ after that?
You've reached the conclusion of this CD. Take the opportunity to evaluate yourself by going to ilmquest.org, where you will find a short quiz on the content of this presentation. That's www.ilmquest.org. The presentation will continue on the next CD. Welcome to an IlmQuest presentation. 21 teaching techniques of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, presented by Muhammad Asharif, Part 3.
And what's interesting, I'll just tell you this story that one of the shuyukh was telling me. This is actually, he was just telling me yesterday, of how when he was younger and he went with Shaykh al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah to the Kaaba. And actually, I tell you, even though it's a very simple story, I started crying at the end of the story. Because in the olden days, and this is like a very long time ago, they didn't have marble on the the Kaaba floor, and you'll be shocked that marble is cool. It's not hot. It doesn't soak in the heat. It reacts with coolness. In the olden days, it would just be hot sand. So if you went for Dhuhr Salah at the Kaaba and you prayed near to the Kaaba, you would burn your feet. And I don't know if you've ever burnt your feet. You might have been on a beach or something like that, but your feet will burn and you can't take it. So he was following the Shaykh, and as the Shaykh came near to the Kaaba, the Shaykh took off his the robe he was wearing, put it down on the ground, and this other brother who has become a Shaykh himself, Hafidahullah, he was saying that he was embarrassed to stand on the robe of Shaykh al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah. So instead, he was standing on the sand, but he was like bouncing left and right, trying to still look respectful, but bouncing right and left. So then the Shaykh, grabbed him while he was doing his salah and pulled him closer so that he could stand on the robe with him. And then this Shaykh, the younger one, he said that he was still embarrassed to put his feet on the robe of the Shaykh, so he slid his feet underneath the robe. He was standing beside him, but he slid his feet underneath, but he was still doing the little bounce. And then when the Shaykh went into ruku', he saw that his foot was like on the sand, and he lifted up his leg and he put it on the robe, so that he would be standing on the robe and he wouldn't feel shy to do that. Rahimahullah. And these are our teachers. Rahimahullah. This other hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he grabbed the eyes of one of the companions. The companion was a slave, and this is just in the dunya, and he's a slave of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet ﷺ put his hands on the companion's eyes, and he said, "Man yashtari al-abd?" Who will buy the slave? Who will buy the slave? And the companion, at first he wanted to pull away because he had the someone grabbing them, and then when he realized that it was the Prophet ﷺ, he desisted, and he put his back into the chest of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "Ya Rasulullah, no one will buy me because I'm not worth anything, and my price is too cheap." And the Prophet ﷺ said in reply to him that, "Verily to Allah you are worth a lot, and you are very expensive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Now on the other side of this playful fun is that some people will say what I'm saying and then they go crazy on their MSN Messenger, the roll on the floor laughing. Anybody use that on the MSN? ROTFL. It's not a football league, it's roll on the floor laughing. So, and what's interesting is that the common thing that they'll do when they're chatting is they go laugh, LOL, laugh out loud. I said, why do you have to laugh out loud? Why can't you just like L, or smiling? They always get the smiley face with the big mouth open, right? It shouldn't be exaggerated laughing. And at the same time, it shouldn't be always laughing and always joking. It should be moderate. True, we smile, but there are times when we become serious. And I've noticed sometimes there will be speakers and teachers that they always teach people through jokes. And I've seen them try to say something serious and people start laughing. And you'll hear them say, "And I'm serious about this." No, don't laugh like this. And then the people are like, "Oh, we're not supposed to laugh." They just think that everything is a joke, and everything is not a joke. And as we're going to come later, in all these techniques, sometimes we think that one technique is the only technique. Like some people will say, Umar radiallahu anhu was very tough, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu may have been softer. But you'll see times where Abu Bakr switched. There are times where Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would switch styles, such as when the Prophet ﷺ died, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was the toughest. Even if all the companions were against him, he was still going forward with that toughness. It causes the hardening of the heart. If there's consistent laughing like that, the hearts of the people harden and they're distracted from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're not remembering Allah azza wa jal, and their hearts become toughened with this, that when serious things come up after that they don't get the message. Technique 14. تأكيده صلى الله عليه وسلم التعليم بالقسم. The Prophet ﷺ would emphasize something by swearing by Allah Azza wa Jal. Using oaths. He would teach people by swearing by Allah in different things. And the ahadith that you'll hear very often, and you may not feel the full intensity of what he's saying sallallahu alayhi wasallam, but if you had heard him sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and now inshallah when you go back to those ahadith, he'll say something and then he'll come to a point right in the middle of the hadith, he'll say وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ مُحَمَّدٍ بِيَدِهِ, and I swear by he in whose hand lies my soul. And then he'll continue and say something, but he'll do a testification. What's interesting in if you go through Juz Amma, most of the surahs have aqsam in them. You see وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ لَا أُقْسِمُ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. You see all of them coming as qasam. If I say to you, I swear by Allah, and then I just move on to the next point, what would you do? Someone would raise their hand, they'd cut off, break the rule, and they'll say, why are you swearing by Allah? Would you ask me that question? You'd say, you didn't finish your point. And what I'm saying this to you is, similarly, when you're reading Qur'an, do the same thing. That if you hear the qasam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pay attention to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testifying to. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, that I swear by the sun, وَضُحَاهَا, you would say to what? Ya Rabbi, why are you swearing? Look at the next ayah. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, and the answer should come right there. But then it's another qasam. وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, that I swear by the moon as it comes after the sun. So you're saying to what? What's the testification for? And as it moves through the ayat, it keeps coming. وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا, to what? وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, it's intensifying in the seriousness of what's going to be said. And here's another challenge for the people. Is there another surah that has more aqsam, one after the other, than Surah وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, Surah Al-Shams? I don't think there is, but you can check it out inshaAllah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not testify more than He testified subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Shams wa-Duhaha. In some of the surahs, and this is almost like a trick question that I would tell the people, Surah Al-Fajr, Wal-Fajr, Walayalin Ash. I'll give this question to the Arabs, just so you guys don't feel bad. I'm not trying to embarrass any Arabs. Wal-Fajr, Walayalin Ash. If there's a qasam, there has to be a maqsum alayh. There has to be something testifying to. Now the question comes, what is the maqsum alayh in Surah Al-Fajr? What is Allah testifying to? Which ayah number? هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ, which is like me setting you up to say ayah number 5. Because there's no way ayah number 5 is the maqsum alayh. It's a question. Is there not an enormous testification in this for those who have intelligence? That's not maqsum alayh. That's not the answer. Maqsum alayh. See, and these are Arabic classes. I know people go to Arabic classes. Just learning Arabic doesn't necessarily mean that a person doesn't learn tafsir, because a person will know something linguistically. وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is condemning the person, but it says حُبُّ الْخَيْرِ. We will say كيف حالك بخير, right? You're good. And Allah is condemning the person. How can for someone who loves the khair be condemned? Because the khair doesn't mean the goodness. Khair in that ayah means that his infatuation for money and for the dunya. In Surah Al-Fajr, it's a trick question. Why? Because the maqsum alayh is mahdoof. It's not in any of the ayat, but it's in between the ayat. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after that ayah that the brother said, هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the maqsum alayh should be right there. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِعَادٍ. The maqsoom alayh is that the people who go against the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be destroyed. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi'ad. Didn't you see what Allah did to the people of Aad? The mahdhuf, the jawab al-qasam is mahdhuf. So what is, I'm just giving you an example of, in Surah Al-Fajr, that almost everybody who couldn't answer that question right here has been listening to Surah Al-Fajr since they were a child and they didn't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying. That even if they were Arabic, they still didn't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah was testifying and it's going on deaf ears. People aren't hearing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testifying to. And that's just inshallah an encouragement that the people go into further. Every ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a testification, ask yourself the question, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala testifying to? Okay, moving along, point 15, technique 15. تكراره صلى الله عليه وسلم القول ثلاثا لتأكيد مضمونه. Repeating. In those days, people didn't have notes, or sometimes they would write in notes, but a lot of people, they would memorize things that were being said. And so you'll see someone like Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, that he would be in a class, and the people would say, like, why aren't you taking notes? And he would say back all the ahadith. He had memorized it from hearing it one time. But those are exceptional. Obviously they didn't have TV and they didn't have the Discovery Channel, with all its great programs. But their intelligence and their strength of memorization increased because of this. Now the Prophet ﷺ, if there was something that needed emphasis, the Prophet ﷺ would repeat it 3 times. And so you'll see in Bukhari, the statement of Anas radiallahu anhu regarding this is he said that the Prophet ﷺ would repeat something 3 times لِيُعْقَلَ عَنْهُ, so that people would understand what he was saying sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Bukhari has the chapter in Bukhari to repeat something 3 times so that the statement will be understood. And this was the explanation of Anas radiallahu anhu of why the Prophet ﷺ would do it. This hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ. There's actually a couple of techniques involved in this. Actually, all of these things have techniques interchanged with one another. The companions, they had stopped for Salat al-Fajr. And the Prophet ﷺ was coming behind them. And when he neared them, because of the coldness of the night, they weren't completing, or they weren't fully cleaning their feet and getting it up onto their ankles when they're making wudu. And if you see little kids, even till today, when they come from wudu, that area is always dry. They never get the ankles right. Maybe some adults too. Might be just the way our legs go into the sink or something like that, but the ankle might be on the bottom and the water doesn't pour onto it and the person doesn't get to wash it properly. The Prophet ﷺ came near to them and he raised his voice. He said, وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ. Imagine if you weren't making wudu properly at that time. Waylun means beware and destroyed for the ankles from hellfire. Waylun lil-a'qabi min an-nar. To raise the voice and to repeat 3 times. And believe me, the lesson is learned like that. And inshallah we're going to be talking about that not always one technique works. Sometimes a different technique can be applied. Just like one technique is playful fun, another technique might be anger. And anger is a technique. It's not just one technique, but the person interchanges and crosses through the technique so that they can get in the different situations benefit from the people who are listening. And I know a lot of times when someone's repeating a hadith, they might say قَالَهَا ثَلَاثًا, like he said it 3 times, or in English the person will say he said it 3 times. And it doesn't have the same effect as saying it like physically, saying it out 3 times. So the person gets the feel for the way that the Prophet ﷺ said it. Point 16. إثارته صلى الله عليه وسلم انتباه السامع بتكرار النداء مع تأخير الجواب, which means that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم would call the listener and cause them to pay attention by calling out their name and calling them without answering or telling them why he's calling. And so the hadith of Mu'adh, where the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, Ya Mu'adh. And Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was traveling with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he's saying, Ya Mu'adh. And Mu'adh radiallahu anhu say, Labbaik ya Rasulullah wa sa'daik. And then the Prophet ﷺ is quiet. They travel, they pass on. And then the Prophet ﷺ would say, Ya Mu'adh. And he say, Labbaik ya Rasulullah wa sa'daik. And then he would remain quiet. Time would pass. And he would say, Ya Mu'adh. Labbaik ya Rasulullah wa sa'daik. And the hadith is there in the books of hadith. But you'll see that, could you imagine that Mu'adh radiallahu anhu wasn't paying attention after that? It would completely grasp the person's attention. And when someone's giving a speech, and I know many times I might go from one point to the next, and I don't necessarily give a pause because we have to finish at 7 o'clock or something like that. But the pauses are almost as important as the words that you're saying. Sometimes a speaker, a teacher will say amazing points, and then move on to the next point without giving the people time to mentally digest what was said. Or to take a point and then pause it in an important part. And you'll see, actually there was one time I was at a camp, and I had like an asthma attack during we were at a campfire, not an asthma attack like I was on the floor, but I couldn't breathe. So I would have to say one sentence, and I was telling the brothers a joke. It was a campfire, and I'd say part of the joke of the story, and then I had to stop and just go, and they're like, what happened next? And then I would say the next part, and I'd go, and they think it's part of the story, but subhanAllah, that was the most exciting joke that they ever heard, the most exciting story. And I didn't do it on purpose, and I would have spoken more quickly if I didn't have that asthma problem. But subhanAllah, if a person knows when to put in those points and just remain silent, that there will be attention paid to what they're saying. So to be thoughtful in your pauses in the speech. And I apologize for this really bad example of Batman and the Joker. In Batman, one of the arch nemesis of Batman is the Joker. The Joker likes to talk too much. Does he talk a lot? Do you remember anything that the Joker says? You don't remember anything that the Joker says. Batman, on the other hand, is always staring at people in the dark. He never says anything, and the Joker's getting all mad at him and stuff. And then right at the end of the cartoon or something, he'll grab the Joker and he says, why did you kill him? And everybody's like, whoa, he's speaking now. Right? And I was actually listening to the people that make the Batman cartoon. They do this on purpose. Their reasoning is that when Batman speaks, we want everybody to pay attention. So we make sure that he remains quiet and thoughtful in his pauses all throughout the cartoon, so that when he does speak, he naturally causes the people to pay attention to whatever he says, because they're thoughtful in speaking. So the person who's speaking a lot doesn't pause. Nobody's really listening to what they're saying. They're just going on and on and on. When a person is direct to the point, thoughtful, then people would hear those words. I have a little way of speaking to children. I know some of the teachers here who are working in Saturday school, Sunday school, things like that, or full-time Islamic school, they might have problems with children that are talking in class and can't keep quiet. They might have a problem with these children. So what the teacher might do with that child is they may raise their voice, telling the child to be quiet. Be quiet! Be quiet! And I won't use worse words than that. But if you walk by and you see a teacher doing this, how could you ever imagine that the children are going to be quiet when they have the blessed example of the teacher in front of them? It will actually provoke them to make more noise. What I do in the class, and this is how the children, I come in mafia style into the class. Alright, what happens in the mafia style is that they lower their voice and people get more scared. So I'll come into the classroom and I won't step into the class. I'll be at the door until everyone's silent. And I do this all year long until they're completely trained. I'll never walk into the class right away. I'll just stand at the door and I'll quietly say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And then the children are like, he's here! Everybody put your head down. Everybody's quiet. So without saying a word, and not even open, and I'm actually whispering. Because some teachers, they lose their voices when they talk in Saturday, Sunday schools, right? They're like, I've been teaching all weekend long. Right? But I would never lose my voice because I'm getting quieter. This is what I would do if, the children, all of them are quiet except the child who's talking to the person behind them, and they're facing that person and they're talking, and the whole class has their head down and they're all quiet. I walk into the classroom and I slowly, I make sure that my shoes are making little those little sounds, the steps, as I walk closer and closer to that person. And because I'm normally at the front of the class, to walk up to a child is a very intimidating thing. And then I bend down over, and by that time the child hears the footsteps coming, he sees everybody's heads down, and then he puts his head down. Or he's still talking a little bit, and then I'll bend over to be right into his ears, and I'll say, "Can you be quiet, please?" He's like, "Okay." The child's quiet, which actually is provoked a reaction to me. This is in sales. I know some of you may be involved in sales, may be very good in sales. You may know this technique, you may not. If a person is doing telemarketing, I did telemarketing a long time ago, but I didn't learn this when I was younger. If someone's doing telemarketing, they do a cold call and they say in a very goofy voice, "How would you like to win $30 million? The reply that the person on the other side will say is that, "I don't know, how can I win $30 million? They will also reply in a goofy way. But when the way the person acts, they will provoke an answer in that same way. So if someone's teaching and they expect something of the children, such as for them to keep quiet or for them to the teacher speaks in that manner so that the children will react in that way. Allah Ta'ala. Moving along. Technique 17, how the Prophet ﷺ would hold the hand of the person who was speaking or hold their shoulders لِإِثَارَةِ انْتِبَاهِهِ, to make the person pay attention. The hadith that you may know very well is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told the companion, كُن فِي الدُّنْيَا كَأَنَّكَ غَرِيبٌ وَعَابِرُ السَّبِيلِ, that be in this dunya as if you're a stranger or a passerby. The Prophet ﷺ was holding the shoulders of the companion when he said it. And so you imagine, not only is the Prophet ﷺ speaking, but the touch, which is actually kinesthetic, like I said in the beginning, the feelings that some people they will learn from the feeling. The fact that they're being touched will add an additional element of attention to the person. In our culture, in North American culture, we don't hold hands. Guys don't hold hands with each other. I don't know if girls hold hands with each other, but guys don't. And even if you look at this crowd, if we took, example, a picture of the brothers from a top, you would see, and if you measure the distance from one brother to the next, I'm pretty sure that you'll see people sitting on that side have the same distance from each other as people on this side. And they didn't do it on purpose, but that's just the way the culture allows. If you get too close to someone, the person's saying look, you're sitting too close, you need to back away a little bit. This is like American culture. If you go to a place like France, or you go to different cultures, as the culture changes, people will come closer, they'll touch more one another. So people will come from France to French guys, or even if you go to Egypt or something like that, and you see two guys holding hands, and you're like, "Oh, don't do that." And I know in Medina there's a lot of different cultures that are there in Medina. So when you meet some brothers from different countries, they just have this natural habit of holding hands with the person, and they're walking. Some things they don't understand when you tell them, "Don't touch my hand." So I had this little technique when a brother would come, "Kif halak Muhammad," and they'll grab my hand and they'll hold it, and I can't hear anything they're saying because my face is turning red, and I'm trying to get rid, because I'll try to move my hand away and they'll search for it and grab my hand and keep walking with it. So I have this technique where I crush their hand. And I smile, and I do it in a playful way so they don't think that I'm mean, but they're like, "Ha ha ha," and they'll try grabbing me again, and then I'll crush it again. And then they'll get the hint that he doesn't want his hand to be held. This is a technique that many teachers and many people who are teaching Islam fail to use successfully. But it's a very important technique. This other hadith, I'll just give you the example of the boy that came and asked permission of the Prophet ﷺ to commit zina. Not only do they know it's haram, but the boy's asking divine permission. He's asking the Prophet ﷺ, "Idhan li fi zina." And imagine how angry the companions would be. The Prophet ﷺ explained to him with questions. It wasn't answers. It wasn't that Allah says in this ayah, it's haram. Don't you know that? But the Prophet ﷺ explained it, so he came to the conclusions himself. And at the end of that, the Prophet ﷺ touched his chest, put his hand near his heart, and made dua for him. How many teachers do that after they're explaining something to a child who's maybe got a detention or did something wrong? Actually put their hand on the child and make dua for them. It rarely happens. I have two techniques of, when I was teaching at Al-Huda school, and I don't teach it anymore, but I was teaching very young grades, and it's from kindergarten to grade 8. There would be some children, and depending on the mood I wanted to create with the child, some of the children would get very in a very arrogant position, and so I might want to enforce my authority. I would stand up very close to them in a very aggressive type stance, and look down at them like this, so they know like who's the boss in the class. That would be one style. The second style, after I've done that, this is like the good cop, bad cop theory that I was explaining in the beginning. I might bend down to even a level lower than the child. So the child is now looking down at me, even though the child may be, this high. I'll be bending down so that I'm looking up at the child, and my hand's on the child's chest, and I start speaking to them. And they're touching, my hand is touching their body, and you can see, you might even see their skin start to change. They might get a little, tense. Things change, the emotion, the bond changes. And when a person does this and they do it successfully, inshallah ta'ala, you can get closer to those people. Some children, and these are non-Muslims, that one parent, I think that he was having so much trouble with his child, and they got into so much trouble and fights, and then one day the father just said, "Look, I love you." He grabbed the child and he hugged that boy, and the boy started crying, and he said, "Dad, you haven't hugged me for the last 6 years. You've never touched me." And that's the power of, just giving you a little example of the kind of power that touch has. Technique number 18, using cliffhangers. In the Arabic is there, إبهامه صلى الله عليه وسلم الشيء لحمل السامع على الاستكشاف عنه للترغيب فيه أو الزجر عنه. The Prophet ﷺ, this is basically what a cliffhanger is. You would say something, and the person doesn't know what you mean totally, and then you pause and give them a chance to think about it, and that will increase in their desire to learn it. Newspapers and TV stations, they always do this. They'll say, and they'll say it's a cliffhanger. They'll say, the verdict on the O.J. Simpson case tonight at 11. And you're like, what happened in the O.J. Simpson case? Tonight at 11. They say it in a nice way, but you're like, I gotta watch, I have to know what happened. Who cares? But the person has to know, because it was a cliffhanger. I gave a cliffhanger in one of my khutbahs, and the cliffhanger was to the effect of, do all good things come to an end? Do all good things come to an end? Is this workshop a good thing? Do you think it's going to go on forever? Then why aren't your hands raised? Obviously. Right, you're thinking something else. Okay, who thinks that all good things do not come to an end? Sheikh Mamdouh, he would charge you $1 for incorrect answer. And mashallah, I thought this is a beautiful teaching technique, because when the people put their money where their answer is, and if you get it wrong, believe me, you'll never forget. No problem. I know you're a little shy to get the wrong answer. That's okay. Which is actually a teaching technique of the teacher, to never try to embarrass someone. And I apologize if I've embarrassed anybody in any of my lectures. Please forgive me. A teacher should never embarrass someone, especially the larger a group gets. When a teacher embarrasses someone, you could almost shut down their listening to you, or that they will not listen to what's being said. They'll be so humiliated and hurt. They may never even come back to the message because of that humiliation. And a person could successfully push someone out of the deen by a little sarcasm and a little painful slight at that person. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me, and inshallah guide us to what is better. Do all good things come to an end? There was one of the mushrikeen in Mecca. He had a line of poetry. And Uthman ibn Mad'un radiallahu anhu, it's not Uthman ibn Affan, Uthman ibn Mad'un radiallahu anhu, he was listening to the poetry. And the first line of the poetry, it says, أَلَا كُلُّ شَيْءٍ سِوَى اللَّهِ بَاطِلٌ. if I'm correct, I might get the i'rab a little wrong, but forgive me inshallah, that verily everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is false. Like anything away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is falsehood. And Uthman ibn Maf'un radiallahu anhu, he said sadaqt, he said you've told the truth. And then the second line of poetry, he said وَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ وَكُلُّ نَعِيمٍ لَا مَحَالَةَ زَائِلُ. He said, and every good na'im, every blessing, without any doubt, will come to an end. And Uthman ibn Maf'un radiallahu anhu, he said كَذَبْت. He said you've lied. فَإِنَّ نَعِيمَ الْجَنَّةِ لَا يَنْفَدْ. That the blessing of paradise never comes to an end. And this actually provoked a fight, and they got up and they hit Uthman ibn Maf'un radiallahu anhu from that. But that was a cliffhanger, and I'm sure you were listening to what the answer was. But to start off with the cliffhanger and then explain it later, the worst thing you could ever do is do a cliffhanger and not answer the cliffhanger, because you'll provoke the anger of the people. An example of this, and inshallah ta'ala I want you to do this for the techniques. You go home, take the technique and see how can I apply this with the people that I'm teaching, the people that I'm trying to explain Islam to. A teacher may have some interesting news, and instead of saying, guess what class, I have some interesting news, and just telling the news, try this technique instead. Say, inshallah, if you're good in class, at the end of class I have some good news that I'm going to tell you. And the whole class, believe me, if you leave the class without telling the children, they will run in the hallways and tell you, you didn't tell us the good news. And even if it's something even very simple, they will still consider it to be something very great because of the way it was presented. As opposed to someone just going forward directly and telling them the good news is such and such. They'll be like, so what? 19. Technique number 19. تعليمه صلى الله عليه وسلم القصص وأخبار الماضين. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaching people using stories and the accounts of the people that came before. And this is an oft used technique that you see through the Quran and through the Sunnah. That there will be stories from people of the past, and the lesson is taught through that. Examples of The Boy and the King. I think every child has seen The Boy and the King. There's a little cartoon, The Boy and the King. And one khatib in our masjid, his whole khutbah was the story of the boy and the king, which is like a technical mistake. He doesn't realize that all these kids, they have a video at home, and they have the Boy and the King cartoon, and they've watched it successfully 7,000 times. Okay, they know the story inside and out. So and he was saying it in Arabic and English translation, and it took, actually the khutbah was prolonged, and the people already knew the story. But there's lessons to learn. So what might be smarter, if that the children already, or the people that are listening already know the story, go quickly through the story and go to the lessons of the story. You also know the story of the woman who gave and then different narrations, there was a man that had gone down to get water for herself, and then came out, saw a dog thirsty, and brought water from her sandal, from the khuf, came back out and gave water to the dog. And the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah forgave her because of this. Okay, now these stories, even most people know them. Why are they so passed out, these hadith? Because I can give you other hadith which may be statements that aren't well known amongst our communities, but stories, a hadith that have stories in them, are well known even to the lay people, which shows you the power of those stories passing on to generations after generations. When I give a khutbah, and you might see, I might start off the khutbah with the story. And I do this for a reason. And the reason is, like some people, I know the traditional way is that to start with an ayah, start with a hadith. And I actually spoke to some shuyukh saying that, is it fard for me to start with an ayah? Because if it's fard, I'll start with an ayah. But there's a technique to provoke the hearing of the people, so that when the ayah comes after the story, they will hear the ayah. Because what happens, and I'll tell you, you know this in Jummah khutbahs, when the person says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqati wa la tamut. Those are ayat that everybody should be listening to, but how often does someone reflect on that? Usually the person is saying, when's the khutbah going to start? As if that part isn't even part of the khutbah, which of course it is. But still the people have almost closed because they've heard it, and they're waiting to another part. So when a story happens, it arrests them. It arrests their mind, and they want to find out. Another beautiful thing about stories and teaching with stories is that you have the attention of the person from the beginning to the end of the story. There's no way that you will lose their attention, because everybody wants to know what happens in the end of the story. No one will doze off at the conclusion of the story. They have to see what happens in the end. Right as soon as you finish the story and start explaining the benefits of the story, that's when you've lost them. Right? But as soon as the story was going on, you still had their attention. So at the end of the khutbah or the speech, if you told the children or the listeners, do you remember the story? They'll say, of course I do. And they can recall the entire story to you. But if it was a speech that was just wording, they couldn't remember anything. Even I challenge people to say, can you tell me what the topic of the khutbah was? They cannot say it. I won't even go on to what did the khatib say. They cannot remember what the topic was. They don't know if he was talking about salah or zakah or the rights of animals in Islam. They don't remember. But if there was a story about how a companion, for example, was merciful to an animal, they would remember that story, and they might connect to that what the topic of the speech was. Sheikh Ali Qarni, Hafidhahullah, he's a sheikh from Saudi Arabia. And if you listen to my speeches and you've listened to Ali Qarni's speeches, you realize that I'm plagiarizing the sheikh stuff. But I've ran out of things from the sheikh, so I have to go and do my own stuff now. But Sheikh Ali Qarni, Hafidhahullah, he was one of the shuyukh, and I only had his tapes. I've never met him in real life, but I've had his tapes and I've memorized his tapes. He speaks, the way he speaks, you could almost swear that he's reading poetry. He speaks so beautifully that he wrote his whole speech in poetry, and he's talking from the paper. All he's doing is reading it out because it's too perfect. Hafidhahullah. And the stories come so beautifully that you won't be able to count how many times you'll start crying. So this is, actually I was talking to one of the shuyukhs, and he was telling me one of his number one most amazing lecture tape was such and such, and he gave me a copy of that tape. I say that Ali Qarni's tape, هَكَذَا عَلَّمَتْنِي حَيَاتِي, is on my number one list of the most amazing tape you'll ever hear. هَكَذَا عَلَّمَتْني حَيَاتِي, it's 2 parts. And there's other tapes, inshallah. You can ask me later what my top 10 lists are for amazing tapes. So his key thing is to use stories. Just a point on the side, like the opposite side of this, is that some people, they only use stories and nothing else. And that's not necessarily the best way to teach. The story has to have other things. Because if a people only give da'wah, they'll say, let me tell you a story. And then they go and they tell a story. Let me tell you another story. And they tell you another story. And again another story. And then someone raises his hand from the audience and says, you know what? I have a story to tell you too. And so everybody's like, look, this story is a little bit too long and we need to go home. There has to be a cross-training, or the techniques have to mix and match. If you only use one technique, you could bore the people out by just using that. So I just want to say to be careful that stories are not the end. It's a technique, but it's not the only technique. اهتمام صلى الله عليه وسلم بتعليم النساء ووعظهن. The Prophet ﷺ, the attention he would pay to women's education and admonishing them and giving them advice specifically. And not only this, but the Prophet ﷺ, you would see, as we saw in earlier techniques, that he would pay special attention to the children. Such as we saw Abu Umair, he went to his house to pass his condolences. You might see the Prophet ﷺ going into the suq, speaking to business people, the people who are dealing with dates and so on. The Prophet ﷺ would pay special attention to focus groups, which is a term you might know, focus groups. To focus, people are focused on one thing. For example, if there is a conference for Muslims who deal in business, and then there should be a focus for that. Not every conference has to be general for everybody. There can be focus and paying attention to the special needs of those people in that focus group. The Prophet ﷺ, in the Eid khutbah, he would give the khutbah, and then he would go into in front of the women and give a speech directly for the women. And you'll see the hadith even, that it'll come in the feminine. The words will come in the feminine. He's speaking directly to them. And if you look at what are the things that the Prophet ﷺ spoke about and focused on, some of those key things were to give sadaqah. Was the sadaqah that a woman should do. And an interesting question is that a woman or a man might ask the sheikh that he say, my wife has this much gold, how much zakah do I have to pay on that gold? And someone who's smart would say that it's your wife's gold, you don't have to pay zakah for it. She has to pay the zakah. And I've heard the ulama even say that she should be the one handing out the zakah. So if she has 50 bracelets going down like this, and the zakah is, a certain percentage, let her take off one of the bracelets and give it. If she has no money in the bank or something like that, that gold itself can be given as zakah, can be given away as zakah. And because the men would overcome the women in speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, and they said this, and they gave this concern to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ made a specific day for the women where he would address them and teach them, and so that they could freely ask their questions. And if you remember back that I said that if I said, are there any questions, no one would raise their hand. Does that mean that there's no questions? It doesn't mean that. It means that people are shy to ask. There's too many people here, they're shy, and the speaker shouldn't think that there's no questions. Instead, the teacher should change the situation so that people can feel comfortable about asking the question. There's different ways to do that. As we see, the men would go around the Prophet ﷺ, and the women might not get that chance to ask the questions, but they still have the questions. And the Prophet ﷺ made a way for them to be able and to ask freely of their questions. You may be saying that there are 21 points. I said 21 teaching techniques, right? Okay, I'm just giving you 2 more techniques right here. Generalizing first, then later explaining. Generalizing first, then later explaining. Using anger as a technique. Like I said, this is also important. I'll just give you an example. The Prophet ﷺ was the best in giving da'wah. But how many people, in the softness of the da'wah that happened in Mecca, how many people became Muslim in Mecca, as opposed to when the Hijrah happened? They went to Medina, and the Battle of Badr and the Battle of Uhud and Battle of Ahzab, all those battles, that's not like debating and so on. That's a jihad that they were doing. And how many people became Muslim after that? So there are times when people learn through anger. And you'll see the Prophet ﷺ, such as when they tried doing shafa' to get the woman who had stolen, to get her penalty taken away from her. And the Prophet ﷺ used anger in that moment. Anger works when you don't use it too often. If you use it too often, then people will say like, isn't he ever going to smile? Right? But if you use it, and subhanAllah, if you remember back when I said in my classrooms, when I teach the kids Islamic studies, I never shout at them. And they know that if I'm angry, I will lower my voice. And if I'm really angry, I'll walk up to the child and whisper in their ear. And they know they're in big trouble when it's that. You don't have to shout. But I save shouting for extreme situations where a child's going to get harmed very quickly, such as a child lifting up a chair to smash another kid on the head with the chair. I will shout, and they'll be shocked because they've never heard me shout before, ever. And I've seen the reaction in their face because I save my shouting for that moment to protect that child, where I need to stop this child immediately. A teacher that shouts all the time, and a child picks up a chair to hit another chair, and then they shout again, the child will be hit. It will not stop the chair from coming down, because the children get used to the shouting. And using the language of the people, as the Prophet ﷺ commanded some of the companions to learn al-lughat al-sirganiyya.
You've reached the conclusion of this CD. Take the opportunity to evaluate yourself by going to ilmquest.org, where you will find a short quiz on the content of this presentation. That's www.ilmquest.org. The presentation will continue on the next CD. Welcome to an IlmQuest presentation. 21 teaching techniques of Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, presented by Muhammad Asharif, Part 4.
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to have a palm tree that he used to lean on, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would give the khutbah. And if you know from the seerah in Medina, that there came a time where he had a pulpit, a mimbar that was made for him, and because of that, the tree became obsolete. The tree became obsolete. And the tree knew that after this day, that the Prophet ﷺ would not be leaning on it anymore. And so the tree started crying. Just like you hear children crying in the background, they said that the tree was crying like a baby. And the companions radiallahu anhum, they heard the tree crying, and the Prophet ﷺ was patting the tree and trying to calm it down and say that it's alright. And you would imagine that this tree understood more than many people understand about Islam, and the nobility of ilm, and the nobility of being in this kind of in gatherings where the inheritance of the Prophet ﷺ is passing through. In Andalus, if you go to Spain today, you might not find too many Muslims, but what you will find is architecture that the Muslims created and the Muslims designed. You will see architecture and you will know that it is a masjid. But when you enter the masjid, you will see that they've converted it into a church. And if you tried to pray 2 rak'at tahiyatul masjid before sitting down, they would kick you out and they wouldn't allow you. In fact, I've heard of people that have been there, they had to sneak behind a pole, just almost as if they're whispering to the masjid that we know that you're a masjid, and we are musallin also. And when you read the poetry of the ulama of Andalus, when Andalus was falling in city after city, you see them writing the poetry of how the minarets are crying and the mimbars. Why? Because there's no musallin that come to them anymore. And so some masajid in North America, you feel as if the masjid is crying, where are the musallin? Do we have musallin? Of course we do. We find them at Eid prayer and Jum'ahs. But the masjid, and subhanAllah, I went to one masjid here, and the Maghrib Isha prayer, it looks like it's a Salatul Jum'ah. And subhanAllah, there's no feeling more sweeter than to see the Muslims coming out in hundreds for Maghrib and coming out in hundreds for Isha. And we were conducting an Islamic class just like you see here, subhanAllah. And it was on a Saturday. In our masjid, on Saturdays, because of the area that we're in, normally everybody's just busy with their lives and the masjid is empty. But on that weekend, because of the class, the Maghrib class that we're doing in our location, that masjid, the masjid was full with musallin. And it came to my head the statements that the companions would see when a talib would come, they would say marhaban bi talib ilm, welcome O talib ilm, because that person who's going out seeking the knowledge of Allah and His Messenger is in such a blessed position. And you know many of the hadith that speak about that person who's going out, and inshaAllah ta'ala all of you are included in that. That you took out this journey, you came so that inshaAllah ta'ala you could learn something and then go forward with what you've learned. Now there is the desire to learn Islam. We have it in our communities, and since I was young, growing up in North America, there comes a certain level in a person's Islamic education where they can't go beyond it. For example, if a person memorizes Juz Amma, they know like maybe 36, 40 surahs, they will never get to be a student in a Quran class again. What will happen is that everybody will need this person to teach. They'll say, we have no teachers, we have armies of children that need to be taught, and you're the only one who knows the surah. It's fard ain for you to teach them. So this person spends year after year after year not going beyond the position that they're in. Or if they know a little tajweed, they don't get advanced classes. And it becomes stagnant. The person can only go up to a certain level, and then there's no more education for that. They're automatically recycled back. And I know here in Houston there's dozens and dozens of masajid, and I don't know with musallas how many Jummah khutbahs are going on, right? How many? Does anybody have a number? Okay, let's just say about 80 khutbahs. And some of those places, do they have more than one khutbah because of the crowd? No? No. Okay, we do. In Washington, we have more than, some places have 5 khutbahs in one location. Right? Because we don't have masajid. Because the property value is very expensive and so on. So the one area will have Jummah khutbahs starting from 10 a.m. in the morning. Every hour they come like the bus. 11:30, 1 o'clock, 1:30, like that. And one khatib has to finish and go. There's such a need for the khatibs. But when you look at where are the khutaba to fill all these positions, I'm sure people who are involved in getting khatibs have the most stressful job. Correct? More stressful than a waiter. Because it's the Thursday night, the khatib cancelled. Who is going to come and give the khutbah now? Or the khatib hasn't come. Are there musalleen there? Yes, but are there people capable of standing up to the mimbar and being able to teach others about Islam? The number gets very few. So this is the reality. Now then the question comes in, are we not giving Islamic classes? The answer is yes, there are Islamic classes. So why is it that after 10, 20, 30 years, there's still no one to give the khutbahs? And our own youth aren't growing up with that ability. So there must be something wrong, and inshallah ta'ala I'm just going to explain some of the things, my own reflections. And I may be wrong in the reflection, but these are my own opinions of things in North America. Because I grew up here and I saw what works and what doesn't, and inshallah ta'ala I'm going to give you some of these tips, and inshallah explain a little bit about like real life situation, how I'm trying to combat what's happening. But before I begin, I just want to just give an example. To study Islam, the manhaj of studying should also be taught by the scholars. For example, someone may say that the very first step in learning Islam is to learn Arabic. Was this a scholar that encouraged this? A lot of times what you'll see is that it's lay people that are encouraging that. Lay people will say that, oh, are you going to study Arabic this summer? Yeah, I'm going to study Arabic. What about you? And so on. And then the Arabic is taught in a summer program or whatnot. It's not necessarily scholars. If you look at the ulama of the past, sometimes the children, they may not understand the Qur'an they're memorizing, but they always started with Qur'an. Go through all the ulama, all of them started with Qur'an. They didn't go to an Arabic for second language class first. They always were in Qur'an, and you see this child memorized 10 years old, this child memorized 12 years old, and so on. And so when I tell people, whenever the cliche, people come and say, I'm going overseas to study Arabic, I'd say, look, this is very good, but let me just give you a change of your goal. I said, this summer when you go overseas, instead of joining an Arabic institute, join a Qur'an institute. And spend your entire summers, 2 months, you should have minimum 2 juz memorized when you come back. Something happens when you go into a Qur'an institute in a Arabic country or so on. When you're in the Qur'an class, there will be all these little kids that, just like they're making noise in the back over there. They'll be making noise in your Qur'an institute. They won't embarrass you when you don't know Arabic. They'll start talking to you. And you'll learn Arabic from them. You'll learn Arabic from those kids. You'll memorize Qur'an. And if someone finishes Qur'an and they become hafid and they don't know Arabic, they will be put on a pedestal. People will say, you're the hafid, you have to give the khutbah. The person says, I don't know khutbah, I don't even know the Arabic of the Qur'an. And they'll be shocked and they'll say, huh? But the people, the community will push that person to learn. Now I ask you, flip it to the other side. Someone who's learned Arabic, even 4 years, they may not be pushed and driven to anything more than that. It's just something that they know. They can say ma fi, hadha, and so on, but they don't memorize any Qur'an. They can't give khutbah, and they're just at the same level as maybe some Arabic speakers. There's countries and countries. We know how many Arabs there are in Syria, right? There's lots of Arabs out there. And when a person learns Arabic, they're basically getting to the same level. But there's more learning to happen. And the example that I give of Arabic, like sometimes in Medina University we have an Arabic program and then the faculty. So some people may say, we're going to purposely fail the Arabic program so that we can study longer and stay in blessed Medina longer. And we would always say in reply to them, if you want to stay longer, go into the faculty where you're learning Sharia or fiqh, hadith and so on, and then you can decide to work or stay longer. But the Arabic is a similarity of someone who's going to a buffet and they're in a lineup. When you're learning Arabic, you're in the line. You're basically picking up your plate. And if you stop on the way and sit down, you haven't eaten anything yet. You've just picked up your plate, and now is the time to start serving yourself. You start taking from the Quran, taking from the Sunnah, with the Arabic that is learned. But that first step to get there is that the person should start with Quran. And like I said, this is my personal opinion, because I know everybody will have their own course that they think is the most important. I've seen people who have memorized Quran, and that Quran pushed them to continue. But not necessarily the opposite. Other classes don't have that strength to push someone to continue after that. Okay, these points, like I said, they're going to come point form. So if you're taking notes, it'll come like swiftly, so you want to pay attention. Firstly, number one is that sometimes the teacher is centralized, meaning that the teacher is brought to one location. And what happens is that when that teacher is in one location, they consistently have to make new material. Like for example, people that were in New Jersey, they actually attended this seminar that I gave in New Jersey. And there might be 3 people like that had traveled over there. And now I'm giving it again. If I was in the same location, suppose I didn't go to New Jersey, I didn't go anywhere else, and I was in one location, I would have to be making up new material. You would be the same class that would come again and again and again. So I'd have to make new material every single time that you came. Do you think I would put quality into it? I would not. And you would even, as we're going to see, you would get bored too. But quality doesn't go into it unless it's recycled. So what I would do now is that if I prepare a khutbah and prepare it properly, it might take me 4 days to write a good khutbah. But then after that, I would go from one location to the other, which offsets the amount of time that I had to prepare that one khutbah in a quality way. And so if there's, for example, and I'm saying a person should reflect in their situations, if you make a connection with a different masjid, or suppose there's a circle of masajid that are interrelated, and this is the imam of this masjid, this is the imam, or here's a teacher here, and here's another teacher there, and they get cycled, which might already happen. Some people are already coming to this conclusion. One imam gives here, one imam gives there, and they work twice as hard on the khutbah, because the second week they don't have to write a new khutbah, they switch masajid. He gives to a different community, and this person gives to another community. A recycling instead of a person being centralized with only one group and always making up new material that doesn't have quality behind it. Point number 2 is a limited or no use of technology. As you see the PowerPoint wasn't that hard to make. The one for the lecture that we did, it wasn't that hard to make. And this is just an like a little secret for the people at the New Jersey. I was making that PowerPoint about half an hour before actually going to the lecture. And now I have it with me, and then I can use it again and again. But something as simple as the PowerPoint has the ability to change how much a person benefits. As we said, the person can go from benefiting and remembering 20% to 40%. And I know right now, if I put what I'm saying right now on a PowerPoint, you would benefit more. Because many of you aren't taking notes, and you're forgetting. As I go to point number 2, you're like, forget point number 1, I just forgot it. And then we move it along. Inshallah, that's why the quiz is coming up, inshallah. So when a person's, and not all the time it has to be a PowerPoint. A person can bring an exhibit. Suppose they're talking about, you can say the importance of miswak. And they bring out, you can get very large miswaks, big ones like this. An exaggerated miswak, and then start talking about the importance of the miswak. And as you speak, you raise it up to the audience. And then start saying things. Something as simple as that, bringing in an exhibit, using techniques that the Prophet ﷺ used, would increase the people's retention of what's being said. So we have the technology, and that technology, just so you know, is used for business. If someone wants to give a business plan and wants to sell, their company to some other company, they always bring PowerPoint. And I think this projector came from a business. It's the company's projector, or LCD projector. They brought it from the business because in the dunya they know the importance of it. So Ahlul Haqq, they should have these techniques and these technologies at their disposal, using it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help people to benefit more. The next point is no assignments or exams to make sure that the students understand the material. In the different halaqas that we give, a person may go for years and years and years and never be challenged to see if they really understood what the teacher was saying or not. And right now, even though there's a quiz, I'm sure when the quiz starts, half of them will go to the bathroom and stuff, and they won't? Okay, inshallah. I don't know Texas that well, so. But in other locations, some of these things, they work, but they have to work together. If I said this to you and then suppose you have a halaqa and you said, yes, quizzes and exams and assignments are good, let's apply it. You know what will happen to your halaqa? Nobody will come. And I'm sure people have we tried that and it didn't work. And I'm going to explain how it can work, but just in a different way. It has to happen, a review. And I know because the time is shortened, there's not too much time for me to do a review, but if a person is sincere to what they're saying and they really want the people to retain what they're saying, I'll just give you an example that I've seen some instructors do, is if they suppose if it's a small group, they make everybody stand up. And everybody has to say one point that they're going to take home with them. Just they learn, what one technique did you learn that's going to change your life when you go home? And one person will say, I learned the technique about smiling because I never smile. Someone else says, I learned the technique that I should occasionally get angry and not always. Someone else will say, I learned the technique of changing the question of the person to something that's more important. I learned the technique of pauses. A fourth person says, I learned the technique of repeating things. So each person is taking one point and they'll also learn from each other. That's just a simple activity, and if someone did it at the end of a class, it'll take 5 minutes, even maybe less than that. But it'll make the difference in the people, whether in regard to how much they retain from what they've learned, what they haven't. So that's assignments or exams or quizzes. Assignments to actually go home and research something. Many times if I'll say, inshallah, we'll look it up, everybody says, yeah, right. And I know one brother, alhamdulillah, he does research it, but in many cases, these things don't get researched. And the person that does go back and research something, that thing out of the whole lecture is the one that they'll never forget. When they go back and they try looking up a hadith book and finding something, actually putting in their effort. So those assignments, exams, quiz and so on, we don't see them in too many of the Islamic educational projects that we do. In some locations, and subhanAllah, as time passed, Muslims used to start studying Islam on chairs. And then some people said that studying on chair is a bid'ah. And even sometimes a person will say laughing and having fun in Islamic class is bid'ah. Have you ever heard it? I haven't heard it. But it's possible. People think that it's just not the way that we learn. You see all these techniques I told you of the Prophet ﷺ. How many teachers do you see using these techniques in their da'wah? Very few, if any. Are these techniques then, can someone say, when it seems strange to the person, and they may automatically put in their mind that this is a bid'ah, but it's not a bid'ah. If the Prophet ﷺ started doing a drawing, it's the sunnah to make drawings when someone's explaining. If the Prophet ﷺ went visiting people in his homes, it would then be sunnah that the teacher also does the same thing when they're instructing. Many times our lectures are the same thing. It's just a lecture. It's just the person talking and the person answering. And I know in a lot of weddings, it's hard, some weddings are a little wacko. And so the other people say, we want to have an Islamic wedding where someone gives a lecture. This is the ideal in Islamic lecture. The Brother Muhammad, can you come and give us a lecture for a wedding? And it's a wedding. It's hard for the people to break out of what they're just used to. But inshallah ta'ala, these techniques and much more after that, this is not the end of all the techniques. There are many, many other techniques. In addition to that, we just need to look further into it and start applying and making things creative. I'll just give you an example of a Friday Halaqa for youth. Instead of calling it the weekly Halaqa, call it the weekly youth bowling night. Okay, and you're smiling because, oh, the bowling night. What youth would not want to go? Would not want to go bowling. And someone who's smart, they'll take the kids to the bowling alley and they say, look, before we go bowling, let's just sit down and for 15 minutes and just remind ourselves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we'll do a little ta'aleem. 15 minutes. Or even follow, sunnah, keep it short, or make it 5 minutes or so on. Keep it short, let them be able to count your words after that. And they'll remember it. And then everybody who's paying attention, do a little review with them, and then okay, let's have some fun. Is that thinking out of the box? It's a little thing. Some people might already do that. Some people have connected. Actually, when I went to the UK, my wife and I were walking at night, and there was another building, and there was a sign that said that this is where the youth program of the conference will be. And the window, it was an open window. The chairs were all forward, military style. They were all like 3 to the side, going back forth, and a teacher who teaches them wudu is like this, the pillars of Islam are like this. Is supposed to be the youth program. I mean, if the parents were there, they would get bored. They would say, I have to lean my back here, I have to lean my back there, and they would even go, they wouldn't be able to take it. Now these are children. Their attention span is like this short, and they're now being bombarded with the television so that it gets shorter and shorter. They can't sit and listen, and it doesn't work like that. So again, the technique is to think out of the box, be more creative in the way that we arrange our classes. After that, the next problem that happens is sometimes there's a retreat, or there may be a conference or something like this, and the people that might write the curriculum for that retreat, conference, or so on may not be scholars. They might be administration. And I'm not blaming people who work on that, mashallah. They work so hard in such a way for months and months that you wouldn't imagine how much work goes into it until you're actually part of how much work. So they'll ask, for example, knowledgeable people, can you help us? Can you write the curriculum? And which person who's actually busy can actually sit down and write a curriculum for a conference? Nobody has time. But what happens in this process is that things aren't consistent. Things aren't consistent, and that in the lecture, a person, when this happens, is that a conference after conference and a retreat after retreat will happen, and that people aren't necessarily following the path of correct learning. And I'm going to be explaining this a little bit while, but sometimes the lectures will be spiritually oriented. So it's talking to the spirituality, trying to encourage and motivate the people, and so on. Other lectures will be fiqh style, where the people are learning issue number 1, issue number 2, issue number 3. These things fluctuate. Sometimes it's popular that the spiritual lectures go forward, and the people think that this is what the people want to hear, so they give a conference like this. And then after a while the people say, we didn't learn anything from last conference, please have a fiqh conference this time. So a fiqh conference happens the second time, then they say, you know what, this fiqh conference was so boring, my iman didn't increase, I wish you could have some spiritual lectures. So then the next conference is a spiritual motivated conference. And the people say, we didn't learn anything from this conference, I wish we could learn more, have a fiqh conference next time. So it's a fiqh conference the second time. It's not written by scholars, there's no progression, and in the end, as we get to the next point, is just a recycling. I call it read it again daddy. Read it again daddy is, this is an Egyptian story. It's called Sharshar Nat Akal al-Bat. Anybody ever heard that? No. Sharshar Nat Akal al-Bat, which is a rabbit that eats ducks. Okay, it's about a story of a rabbit that eats ducks. In a story like this, it's just so cute, the story, that even though the child may have heard the story before, they want to hear it again. So the parent may, for example, like before you go to bed, I'm going to read you a story, and they'll say, Daddy, read me Shar Shar Nat. So the dad's like, you need to read some other books that are important to you. But the child says, no, this one sounded so beautiful, I want to hear it again. The reason I'm saying this is that in many of our conferences, lectures, that people get into this, Sheikh so-and-so, his lecture at this past conference was so good, please just do it again, we loved it so much. And then conference after conference is just a read it again. And if someone's been to progressive conferences, like they're going from one conference to the other, they realize that if they just skip this lecture, they would not miss anything. It's just a revision. And it becomes stagnant. And this happens where it might not be a scholar that's pushing forward the curriculum, but it's just people that enjoy listening to certain types of lectures. So you hear the same lectures again and again and again. Another problem or an issue that happens is that the person may say that we have these students for only one retreat. This is the only time of the year we have them. Let's teach them everything in this 2 days, in this weekend. So they have a list of 15 different classes that they're going to teach them in a 2-day camp where the kids are coming to swim anyway. And the people that are arranging it are giving them 15 classes a day. They're not listening, and even if they did, I give lectures, and if you speak to anyone who's given lectures, when they have a Pepsi taste test with Coca-Cola, what you get in an Islamic lecture is just, that cup when you just go like that. The whole retreat could be like this, maybe even less than that. Every single subject is just a little sampling of what's out there. Just little samples. And the person, they go, this sample tastes so sweet, I can't wait till next year to get the same sample. So it's a sampling, and the next year comes. Then 20 years will pass by, and this person will taste that sweetness but realize that they never got a full cup and they haven't gone to the 2-liter bottle or more than that. So conferences that teach everything, in reality, they teach very little. As opposed to, for example, in the Al-Maghrib Institute, we do 2 weekends. And the 2 weekends are the same amount of time that someone will spend at a conference. Or someone, forget even conferences, they'll watch football games or something like that. It's that same amount of time, but it's all focused on one subject. So starting from Friday, like 7:30 to 8:30 is class number 1, Tafsir Juz Amma. 8:30 to 9:30, class number 2, Tafsir Juz Amma. On Saturday, 10:30 to 8 o'clock at night, every 15 minutes, class 3, class 4, class 5, class 6, class 7, class 8, then Sunday, class 9, class 10, class 12, and you're seeing, wait a second, these people must be learning something. It's not 15 different subjects, it's just one, but doing it right. Teaching the people correctly and using their weekends. And it's not just one weekend, but then they come back the second weekend. So it's 2 weekends. At the end of the 2 weekends, the person says, this is a lot of information. And we know they have to digest it. So then what we do is we say, look, go home, study this on your own time, be consistent, and after 1 month we're going to reconvene and we'll administer an exam. And the exam, actually as we were getting to it, the exam will then be, the marks will go to the American Open University and are accredited by Al-Azhar University. So in English, the person has the ability to get a credit from Al-Azhar University. Like that. And it goes down. And inshallah ta'ala, like I said, this class is coming to Houston. And inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue it. The next point is what's called motivational lectures. There's no such thing as a motivational lecture, because it's just a fallacy. The person says motivational. How many times has a person give a motivational lecture about orphans in some country and go outside and look at the sadaqah box for those orphans? Was it motivational? No, it wasn't. As soon as the people leave, they don't remember what happened to those orphans. So it's called a motivational lecture, but in reality it is not motivational. When we started the Al-Maghrib class, there was actually, alhamdulillah, we're able to gather youth that don't normally come to any halaqas. Brothers and sisters that don't even come to the masjid, they came to the class. And these are like university level classes. And I was so happy that they came. But the more that they learned about Islam, it came to a point where they knew so much that if they went back to their old ways, they would be doing it out of knowledge that this was haram. And they would go back to the sin in arrogance to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm telling you from my experience, when we see youth that aren't practicing Islam, they're not doing it out of arrogance. They're doing it because we haven't taught them properly. They're sincere inshaAllah, but they haven't been taught. And they may reply back, we think that they know things, but they really haven't. Ask them how many Islamic classes they've been to, they may have never been to a single class. So they don't have the knowledge to fall back on. We just get angry because we may have been to more classes and we think that they know as much as we do, but they might not. And we just have to be merciful with them. And with knowledge comes action. It comes forward. It will either come action that for the good, or the person could be worse. But they have to choose one of the situations after the knowledge has come to them. For example, I'll just give you an example in Juz Amma, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say something, or one of the ayat. فَذُوقُوا فَلَن نَّزِيدَكُمْ إِلَّا عَذَابًا. This ayah is in the first Surah Naba, and many of you may have memorized it. فَذُوقُوا فَلَن نَّزِيدَكُمْ إِلَّا عَذَابًا. And in the books of tafsirs they said that this is one of the hardest ayat against Ahlul Nar, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that every time the Ahlul Nar ask for, or the people of hellfire ask for the punishment to be lightened, it will be a cause for the punishment to be intensified. And if you go up those ayat that are coming right before that, if you look at the description of hellfire, you'll realize that nobody can take this hellfire. But why do people still go forward into the sin? It's because of their ignorance of the reality of hellfire. It's their ignorance of it. So when someone truly learns these ayat, this is where the motivation comes. When they're alone at home and they're walking by themselves, it's not about some fancy motivational lecture. They now have knowledge to question themselves. And is what I'm doing right or wrong? And with that knowledge comes motivation. We just haven't done it properly in the past, but inshallah ta'ala, as we go forward and our education becomes better and more quality, we will see inshallah that there will be a reaction from the people in the way they practice their deen. You may see some institutions where like halaqas go on, and no specific places that I mean. I'm just talking about even my experience growing up in Canada. There was always a weekly halaqa that went by. And just take, if I went from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 and I went to halaqas every single weekend, now look at how much time is dedicated. Like years and years, maybe 15 years of going to a weekly halaqa. And then if you took that graduating class, those youth that are now moving on to university, and tell them, show everybody what you learned from these weekly halaqas, show the world your knowledge, you'll see that they're still confused. Was the time spent? Yes, it was. Was it spent efficiently? No, it wasn't. It just passed. And so again, it's a focus and it's amana. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask us about all these hours that we spend, that why didn't we put quality into it? And instead of doing something every single week, why don't we just let it go and prepare something more quality? For example, saying that, look, our halaqah is every 2 weeks, but on this Friday, a couple of people are going to get together to make sure that next week's halaqah is twice as productive. And we're going to prepare games and so on this Friday, and then the next Friday, we're going to come with twice as much quality instead of just doing things, but instead working more on the quality of that. The dedication factor. I was telling a brother outside, because a lot of people, when they delay their studying of Islam, they delay it with the excuse that one day they will study overseas. They say, I'm going to go to some exotic and beautiful country, and I will sit in the desert, and I will study with the greatest sheikh of that country, and I will learn everything for 15 years, and then I will come back as the greatest da'i to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in North America. Does it happen? Of course it doesn't. The dedication factor. I'll just show you an example. If I said, how many people want to memorize the Quran? Raise your hand if you want to memorize the Quran. I'm not setting you up, don't worry about it. If you make your intention, inshallah, you'll get the reward for it. You guys don't want to memorize Quran? Don't want to memorize Quran? Okay, we all want to memorize Quran. And I can ask the shuyukh, what does it take to memorize Quran? They have to come tonight after this lecture for 2 hours minimum, for lesson number 1. Then tomorrow after Fajr, they're going to stay for an hour and a half. And then they're going to come back at Maghrib for 3 hours. And they're going to do this Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll give them a break on Friday. And they come back Saturday. In the morning, at night. 4 or 5 hours a day. And then if I ask you now, raise your hand if you're willing to dedicate to this. How many hands would go up? Still hands would come up. This is the interesting. Hands would still come up. But then comes the practice. How many people will actually show up for that class? I would say 2 people. On the first day and on the second day there would be nobody left. And and not only nobody left, the teacher might also not be there because they had enough. When when I memorized Quran when I was younger, ever since then people would come up to me and say, can I study Quran with you, Muhammad? And it's hard to say no to people because they think that, I'm hiding knowledge from them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me a responsibility, I'm not fulfilling it, and so on. I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about. One person had put the guilt trip on me, and then I said, okay, you come to my room. This is in the University of Medina. I said, you come to my room and I'll teach you. And he said, why don't you come to my room instead? And so I was young and gullible, so I said, okay, inshallah, I'll come and teach you in your room. So I go, where do you live? He said, I'm on the 5th floor. There's no elevator and stuff. On the 5th floor in this location. So I said, okay, what time do you want me to come? He said, come at this time. So the time is set. I'm not charging him $50 an hour or something like that. I knock on the door, there's no answer. I told everybody, no, I have to go and teach this person. I knock on the door, there's no answer. Knock, 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 no answer. I left. The next day I see him maybe in a cafeteria. I said, what happened? And he said, I got kind of busy last night. So I learned my lesson. This is my technique now when someone asks me, can you teach me Quran? I tell them when to come. I said, let's start tonight for 3 hours. And they say in reply, I'm actually kind of busy tonight. And then I go, okay, tomorrow we'll make up tonight, we'll stay for 6 hours. It's a bluff. You get the idea. The dedication factor. How do you make the dedication factor? How do you get people dedicated? Even this class today, if I told you that let's after Isha continue for another 6 hours, you could never do it. It's only interesting up to a certain point, and then you have to get on with your lives. So now Al-Maghrib Institute teaches in 2 weekends, intensively, like all day long. How do we keep people into the class? What's interesting is that nobody comes in free. There's a financial commitment. And anybody that gets a scholarship, 9 out of 10 will fail. They will not make it till the end. Even some people, they want to volunteer and they might get in free because they're volunteering. I would tell them, if you want to benefit from this class, don't volunteer. Just pay the tuition, $165, and be a student. Because when a person thinks that they're getting something for free, then they also attach almost like a worthlessness to that. They'll say, if I'm getting it for free, then who cares if I miss it? If someone right now walked out and just went home, will there be any punishment for them? No. But if they paid $1,000 to attend a one-day seminar about the teaching techniques of the Prophet ﷺ, they would not walk home. Or they would walk home biting their nails, saying that I just blew $1,000 on this. A financial commitment to this. And because of there's the financial commitment, and because of that we have the exam. The exam is one of the most important things in teaching people Islam. That they have to be tested in what they've learned. And I'll tell the people that if I told you that at the end of this there's going to be a full-fledged exam, a 2-hour exam, not the 10-minute quiz that you're getting, 2-hour exam, and I'm going to take it, I'm going to personally mark it myself, and the mark that you get on this exam, I'm going to submit to your university and your work. I'm going to tell them how good you did or the opposite. And then they in turn, we have a special deal, that they will directly deduct or increase your salary based on the marks that you get. Would you be more serious about this class?
Sure.
For sure, right? You would be more serious, but it's not happening. You would benefit on a different level. So how do we get people to that level? One of those important things is by making them put in a financial commitment. That's just a little bit of that. And also the exam. There has to be an exam so they get the chance to go home, look over their notes. If there's an exam and someone didn't take notes, at the very least he would have to go phone up and photocopy someone else's notes in order to come to the exam. Anyhow, just continuing. 2 weekends. The 2-weekend class has never been done before. In Al-Maghrib Institute, we started something new, trying to think out of the box. Can Islam be taught in 2 weekends? Someone may ask that question. And I would say in reply, can Islam be taught in 8 weeks? And they'll say, of course it can, those 8-week classes that you see all the time. And I'll tell you the feedback of teachers who have taught in this method. 8-week course, the classes are just shorter, but they're dragged on. The person studies for 2 hours on a Sunday, and then they leave for 1 week, and then they come back on Sunday. Half the class will not come back the next week, and there will be a new half that come to the class. That's number one. Number two is that with all that break in between, they would have forgotten everything that they learned on the first Sunday. So all this teacher does all through the 8 weeks is reteach everything. So alif ba ta, alif ba ta. Ask any kid who's been into Saturday Sunday school, how many times have you learned alif ba ta? I'm sure that the minimum or the average is 30 times that they've learned it. It just keeps getting recycled. New kids come in, they never get beyond alif ba ta, alif ba ta. They keep learning it again and again. So what we did with the Al-Maghrib Institute is we just took all those hours of an 8-weekend program and put them together into 2 weekends only. How this helps the person who is busy in their education, maybe they're at university, or busy in their work, they can't go overseas. Who can't dedicate 2 weekends to studying a full course? Everybody can. That's just the nature of our life. We can dedicate short term but not long term. And so we tell them, do whatever science you want, be a doctor, lawyer, IT professional, or whatever you want to do, and open a restaurant and so on, but come for these 2 weekends. And so that person, and especially there's a lot of people think, okay, the solution is to go overseas, but there are women that don't have that opportunity to go overseas, and a person has responsibility. Does that mean that they'll never learn Islam? It's not true. We just have to use our resources and use them properly and efficiently to teach the people about Islam. One of the last things, inshallah, that I'm going to be explaining is the difference between our institute, Al-Maghrib Institute, and other institutes. People ask me the question, where is Al-Maghrib located? And I'll say in reply, Al-Maghrib Institute, where is Al-Maghrib Institute located? I'll say in reply, it's located where the students are. Because if you look at an Islamic class, there may be 80 people and 1 teacher. Is it smarter to bring 80 students to the teacher, or the teacher to 80 students? Obviously it's smarter to bring the teacher to the students. So in some institutions, when they have a building and there's a lot of finances, they have to pay for electricity and so on, and going, and everybody's building centers all around the US, and this person wants to build one more, that this center has no education, and this center has like 5 imams. So what we did instead is that we go and we talk to different masajid and different organizations. We'll say, you provide us the location, we provide you the service and the teacher. And that's how we join together. So we work together. They already built the location, we don't need to build another location. And your students are there, they can't all fly in to come study with us, we will just send the teacher. And so our Al-Maghrib classes are on location. And I'll tell you that when there's an area that doesn't have too many students, we don't invest teachers in that area. But alhamdulillah ta'ala, because of your own dedication to Islam, alhamdulillah, it turned our eyes to Houston. Because of, inshallah, your sincerity in coming to Islam. And out of other places, you can go to Ohio and others that still want the class, but the dedication is not there. And we can't invest the time in that. But over here, that there's so many people that they want to learn, that it's almost forcing the teachers that say, we need to pay attention to educating these people that want to learn. And so, I guess you've heard, but just if you haven't heard, out of the location that we teach in Al-Maghrib Institute, we've taught it in College Park near the University of Maryland, the University of Pennsylvania. We've taught it at George Mason University, and we try to do this to work with the youth more specifically as they're growing older, the high school and university age. And of course, everybody's welcome. We've done it in Canada, in Algonquin College in Canada, and now we're actually, before this, we're doing it in Australia. And the class that some people missed, they were planning to travel to Australia just to study it, to study that class. But the tickets are like $2,000. You can go to Egypt and back and Pakistan and back. It's not $2,000. Australia is $2,000. So it didn't work out. But I'm telling you, this class in Houston, already people from the East Coast are planning to come to this one. They're going to fly in. And alhamdulillah, Al-Maghrib, I told the smaller areas that we don't have the ability to send a teacher to them. We tell them that, look, gather 5, 6 of the most potential youth. The youth that you have, brothers and sisters, that have the potential to lead your community, bring them to us in a van. And the adults should pay for their safe passage. Their parents and the community, make sure that they get to the class, and that benefit will come back to the people. That an imam doesn't have to be brought from this location, that the imams can be brought up in the local area. And those, inshallah, you'll find that will be the most effective imams. People that come from their own, they've been to a public school, they've seen it, and inshallah ta'ala they will have effect with the people around them. Allah ta'ala a'lam. The website is almaghrib.org, and you'll ask me, why is it called Al-Maghrib Institute? And go to the website. The first question is, why is it called Al-Maghrib Institute? So that's another cliffhanger for you, inshallah. Why is it called Al-Maghrib Institute? You'll see it on the website, inshallah. And the registration is actually available right now for the Houston event that's going to be in October. And our plan for the Al-Maghrib Institute is to have 4 special event double weekend courses, accredited courses here in Houston over the period of 1 year. So inshallah, basically, if someone just took it casually, just in 1 year, just attend these classes, after say 6, 7 years, they'll have their bachelor's degree in the Islamic sciences accredited by Al-Azhar University. Our classes, our capacity is about 80 students, and it gets basically sold out at that. Imagine, inshallah ta'ala, after 6, 7 years, Houston will have 80 local people who have graduated with bachelor degrees in Islamic studies from your own people. We're not talking about 1 or 2 going overseas. From your own youth, 80 people minimum, inshallah. And that's our plan. We hope to invest this in Houston. And all we ask in reply, and I just want to mention this about this masjid specifically, and the masjid that I've been to, that alhamdulillah, that they were most welcoming to us and allowing us to come. I know, subhanAllah, the disunity of the Muslims in many areas that I've been, that everybody thinks that there's an agenda the person has. So one masjid will not let this person speak, another masjid won't let, and this is in our area. And people don't even want me to speak because they're afraid that one day I might start an agenda. You know what my agenda is? It's just to bring khair to the people. It's just to educate. I promise you there's no agenda above that. And alhamdulillah that this community was welcoming, this masjid specifically, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you barakah in your own community, because this was the community that came forward and said we were the ones who will assist. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless that. And you'll see communities that say we don't want to assist, almost that it crumbles, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings others that call. May Allah azza wa jal to continue to give you barakah in your activities and your work.